Present this evening are Mrs. Gerber, Mrs. Iacono, Mr. Dwyer, Mr. Fadaby, Mr. Carey, and Mrs. Brand. Mr. Liu will be absent this evening, and I anticipate that Mr. Convertito and Mrs. Kennelly will be joining us shortly. This evening, after we do the Pledge of Allegiance, I would just ask that everybody stand for a moment of silence in memory of Karen Jones. She was a member of the PTA at Roger Ludlow Middle School and Osborne Hill School. She passed away last week. So, thank you. This evening we'll start with the presentation of the elementary math curriculum, grades 3 through 5. Dr. Title, I'll turn this over to you and your team.
Okay, thank you. It's a team effort, so we're going to start with Dr. Rosado, then Mr. Wakeman, Ms. Tyler Leonard are all available, and I'm going to move around so people can see the screen behind me.
Thank you, Dr. Title. Yes, this evening we are really excited and pleased to be bringing you the newly revised math curriculum documents for grades 3, 4, and 5. The documents that you received on Friday, they represent the culmination of work for the past few years, actually, of research, review, writing on the part of many, many elementary teachers under Walter Wakeman's leadership. They really focus on the work of the elementary team in grades 3, 4, and 5. All of the elementary schools were involved. In addition, we had a parent focus group which met on March 1st. The members of the core writing team for the curriculum and the parent group are in your folder as well. Tonight actually begins a conversation, if you will, about math that's going to take us probably a couple of years. Next school year, we are also going to be bringing forward pre-K through 2, as well as the secondary math curriculum. So we are doing a lot of math work in the district as we speak. Subsequent to you receiving the documents in your Friday packet, a few questions came forward to us. So I took the liberty of putting together some documents for you at your place. You'll see a manila folder. And in them, I just want to take a moment to just let you know what's in the folder, and you can look at these at another time. We're not going to review them tonight, but I just wanted you to be aware of what's in there. The first document is an executive summary of a report that was put together by the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers. These are the two national groups that are responsible for putting together the Common Core State Standards, which you've heard quite a bit about. The second document is an overview of the Common Core State Standards grades K through 12. So what you have in this document are the 8 mathematical principles that they endorse, and then a one-page overview that gives you the standards for each of the grade levels, K through 12. So that's going to be a very handy and important document for you to have. The third document is a frequently asked questions format document of these two organizations focused on the Common Core State Standards. So I think you'll find this helpful in terms of understanding the process that went into developing them and how they're being used across the country. And then the final 4 documents are very brief comparative studies of the Common Core. The first is comparing the Common Core State Standards with the National Math Advisory Panel. The second compares the Common Core to the standards in 2 very high-performing states in mathematics, California and Massachusetts. And the third and the fourth documents compare the Common Core to the math programs in both Japan and Singapore. So it's important to know that the Common Core standards were internationally benchmarked by the organizing group. I do have the full report if you'd like to see it, but I've given you the executive summary, which I think you'll find quite helpful. What you're going to hear about tonight is the work that's been happening in grades 3, 4, and 5. We're asking you to consider this curriculum for approval at your next meeting. And Walter's put together, I think, a really interesting presentation which should take you through those standards and some of the activities that the students will be doing. So I'm going to turn it over to Walter at this time, and then at the end, we're available for any questions you might have.
Dr. Rosado, thank you very much. I just want to make sure that board members received a copy of the PowerPoint. I did put one at your place, so it is available to you. Thank you. I first want to just express my appreciation to being here and being able to present the grades 3, 4, and 5 math curriculum documents this evening. And I also would not be here were it not for the efforts of many, many teachers. As Dr. Rosado said, over the past few years, we have been looking at the Common Core state standards and interpreting them and organizing them and working with them to finally culminate in the document that you have before you. And at this time, I would like just to acknowledge some of the teachers who are present here tonight, just for all their hard work. So if the teachers would please just stand for a moment so the board can recognize the teachers who have participated in this process. And again, this is a handful of the teachers who are in part of this process, and I really appreciate them coming out this evening on their own time to be part of this, be supportive. I also would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the building principals who are also very supportive along this process, teachers providing feedback, and the principals allowing time and effort for teachers to have conversations around this too. So again, appreciate that. Just to put this to a broader context, I'm bringing forward tonight grades 3, 4, and 5. However, this is not in isolation. The Common Core state standards have been developed K through 12. What you have before you is just a graphic of the grades K through 8, and part of what I want to display with this is that there has been a significant shift that the Common Core is asking from our current documents to where we're going with the Common Core. If you look, for example, in kindergarten, on the far left-hand side, that says counting and cardinality, you'll notice the band goes there, and it's only in kindergarten. We currently have some counting standards in our first grade, even in our second grade document, the current Fairfield document. Those noted on the Common Core state standards are no longer going to be taught in those grades. It's expected that students will have mastered them. So it's much more clarity in the definition of some of the standards. If now you go down to grades 3, 4, and 5, the focus of this evening, you'll note that the operations and algebraic reasoning, the number and operations, base 10, measurement and data, geometry, and number and operations with fractions are all in the grades 3, 4, and 5. I just want to highlight that last column there in the grades 3, 4, and 5. The fractions is a new component that we bring into with grade 3 and go into much more depth. And as you notice in grade 6, the fraction drops off, and that's because the sophistication and level of understanding about fractions moves into rational and proportional reasoning. So it's sort of extending the elementary understandings into more sophisticated thinking. So the work that the teachers have done over the past couple of years was really to look at the Common Core state standards, and we went through and identified what are the big ideas, what are the big concepts around the Common Core state standards, and how are we going to organize them, not only across the grade levels, but how are we going to articulate them through the grade levels so that there's a continuum. Another significant shift is the place value understandings that we learn in third grade in an old curriculum, and even in the resources that we have. It was considered spiraling, and we would see it again in fourth grade and see it again in fifth grade. The shift with the Common Core state standards is that the place value concepts addressed in grade 3 are expected to be mastered in grade 3 and built on in grade 4, and then continue to be built on in grade 5. I'll walk you through an example of that actually with a multiplication sample. So once all the units have been developed and each of the units is described as with an overview, this is what the focus of the unit is about, with the overriding big ideas or concepts that are being addressed in that unit. Along with that are matching essential questions that help address that. Now, these are unit specific. These are help guide teachers as well on what the big ideas are within the units. And then underneath that are the actual standards that are aligned with the unit. So I'm going to actually walk you through now an example of one of the standards. Here's an example, just to translate for you. Third grade MBT is number in base 10, and that's standard 5. Apply properties of operations. You'll notice that there's an emphasis on the commutative property, associative property, and distributive property. That is throughout this document. Again, another shift, even though it is in our current Fairfield documents, the properties are in our current Fairfield documents, it is a greater emphasis in the Common Core, and it's a thread that ties not only within a grade, but across the grades. As we move into grade 4, we expect students to multiply multi-digit numbers. And again, you'll note using, based on place value and properties of operation again, and it's represented in a variety of models. And in grade 5, we expect students to fluently multiply multi-digit whole numbers. That includes using the standard algorithm. But note, I also put in here, there's a shift in grade 5. It's not only just multiplication that we're focusing on, but there's a shift to computation with fractions as well. So you can see the sophistication, how it builds from one year to the next. So I'm going to give you a quick snapshot of what it looks like. Here's an early grade 3. So 5 times 7 is children are beginning to develop the concept of multiplication. That is, they're moving from additive thinking to multiplicative thinking. In terms of thinking, instead of skip counting by 5s, 5, 10, 15, they're thinking of groups of 5 and how many groups do they have. And they can even decompose the 7 to more friendly numbers for them in early understandings of multiplication to 5 times 5 plus 2. And by the end of the year, if you will note, the students are expected, in the standards, students are expected to fluently compute with whole numbers through 100. That includes all single-digit computation, 0 through 10, and with automaticity. So this is just, again, the beginning of the year in grade 3. In grade 4, we shift to multi-digit computation. Notice, again, it's the distributive property that's being displayed here, decomposing 24 and 19 into by place value. And in grade 5, computation with fractions. So, developing these early concepts, I want to show you an example of what that might look like in a classroom. And again, this is due to the work of the teachers in the classroom. Here is a situation where the students were provided with a problem about counting, how to efficiently determine the quantity of muffins that are baked in a baker's tray. And they're playing with a variety of strategies. And then to increase the rigor, students are actually comparing the strategies and looking at what are the most efficient strategies. And I just want you to note the thinking that this particular student did. 5 times 5 is 25. You can see the skip counting on the right-hand side, and then the grouping on the left-hand side. And finally, the culmination in writing 5 times 5 is 25, and the 5 times 2 is 10, and combining those numbers together. I just want to point out, these are foundational skills to algebra. When students get there, except on an elementary level, they're dealing with this in whole numbers. As we move into grade 4, I just want to note, I was actually observing this student as she was doing this, and it was fascinating to watch her interpret the problem. First of all, you can see her underline and pulling out the salient points of the numbers in the top problem. And essentially, students were asked to raise some money and for a museum trip and wondered whether they had enough to cover the trip. But I want you to pay attention to what she had actually done. She actually decomposed the numbers to 20 plus 4 and the 10 plus 9. So she's already building those binomials, if you will, looking at the numbers, breaking them apart. And then she did that distributive model, but she used an area model to represent her thinking. I also would like to point out in this particular slide, if you notice in each one of the little area boxes that she has, she's using her known facts and computation to do that. And she did the addition on the side to come up with her answer. And this is an example, this is again where a child is developing her understanding of multi-digit computation. And so she's on the continuum, well on the path to be able to do that. Then we move into grade 5. And here's a problem situation again where students are provided with a recipe that serves, to make fruit punch that serves 5, and Sarah is planning a party for 20. So it's actually a multi-step problem, and I would like to just illustrate a little bit more about how this student approached it. If you notice, the student took 3.5 and multiplied it times 4. So the 3 times 4 and the 1/2 times 4 to come up with the 12 times 2, and actually extended that beyond what was requested and found out not only the total number of cups, but a conversion within a given measurement system, also another standard at grade 5. So the Common Core, what I've just shared with you are the content standards. That's what we want students to know and to be able to do. The Common Core also provides us with the mathematical practice standards that Dr. Rosado referred to a moment ago, and those, there are copies of that not only in the curriculum document, but in the Common Core state standards that you have in your folders. And they support the deep mathematical understandings. It's what this is how we expect students to communicate in their mathematics, making sense of problems and so forth. So I'm taking you into classrooms now in Fairfield, and you're looking at students who are making sense of the problem. Right here they are identifying and discussing the mathematics. They're developing math language, they're articulating their ideas, and they're also verbally rehearsing prior to actually getting engaged in problem solving. They're thinking about where they might begin. Here's an example of the students collaborating, and as you know, that's one of the 21st century skills. That's really important and critical for students today. They need to be able to collaborate and communicate their understandings, they're explaining their thinking to each other, and how best to approach the problem solving as they work together. Again, it's a lot of revising of their thinking as they're moving through this process. In this next slide, I thought it would be helpful if I provided you the context of the problem that is being worked on. Essentially, there are 12 cans of dog food for $15 and 20 for $23. I just want to point at, these numbers are chosen strategically. If you notice, there's a $3 difference. 20 cans for 23 with, and 12 for 15. And so the students were sharing their reasoning on how they were to solve the problem. And here's an example of one student. Actually, her partner is just outside of the image here. But there was some collaboration. This is one strategy that students used to solve the problem, and she's explaining it to her peers in her class. And just to illustrate for you what she has done, she actually broke 15 into 12 plus 3, and she knew that the 12 divided by 12 was $1 easily, and then looked at 3 and was able to divide that by 12 to come up with $1.25 to justify her reasoning. I love this next shot. It's a great illustration of students who are convincing their peers. They're constructing viable arguments. So they have to explain their strategies and their solutions to their peers. If you'll note the computation toward the bottom of the screen. I'd also like you to note the attention of the rest of the students in the classroom. They're very attentive and listening to the explanation. Again, a tribute to the teachers in Fairfield for establishing this kind of mathematical community and culture, and a great illustration of mathematical practice in process. And this brings us to our final slide, which is questioning the reasoning of others. This really is, once students have presented their thinking, does their reasoning hold water? It's if you will, an elementary version of proof. Is it convincing? It's an opportunity for students to question the thinking for clarity or for further understanding of how a student had presented a problem. I also would like to just point out once students start to compare and analyze different strategies for solutions to problems, they're really entering into some more high-order thinking skills and determining which are more efficient strategies to solve problems, what might be the best. In some cases, it may be, for example, the standard algorithm. In other cases, it may not be. But this really is an opportunity for students to do that. And one other point I'd like to point out on this slide is if you note the students who are raising their hand, there's a little girl in the foreground and the little boy in the midground. They're both directing their questions not to the teacher, but to actually the students who had just in their presentation. Again, it's a healthy environment of dialogue, and also a credit to the teachers for establishing this kind of culture in the classroom. So these are the curriculum documents. I've tried to give you a sampling of the overview of the documents as well as a sample of the standards as it goes through the continuum of the grades, and also illustrate for you what a mathematical practices look like and how they're lived in the classroom or come alive in the classroom. So I'd like to open it up at this time for questions of the board.
Should we turn this off?
Who'd like to start? Anybody have any questions? Mrs. Brand?
I first heard the term spiral instruction at the Cooperative Education Services. Can you describe what we have currently and how it's different from spiral?
Now we have more of a spiraling curriculum, and honestly, it's interpreted a little bit differently depending on the publishers. But what we have in Fairfield is essentially, we will talk about place value concepts in third grade, for example. We will readdress those same place value concepts in, for example, borrowing and carrying when you're adding or subtracting in grade 4, and then they're revisited again in grade 5. Just one point I'd like to point out, when we're talking, for example, about addition and subtraction, there is some place value and regrouping that we talk about in grade 3 as we're building numbers into the thousands. Once we get into the grade 4, it's expected that students are able to compute fluently with that. And once we're in grade 5, there is no addition and subtraction because it's expected that students have mastered it by then. And so that it is not spiraling or coming around again.
Yeah, I guess that was my question. What happens with students that don't master something, and how do we accommodate them? And what also do we do, because we have a lot of differentiation, particularly in elementary, do with the student in grade 3 who's already mastered that, but there's also some repeat, and then in grade 5?
Right. A very layered question and an excellent question. For students who have not, who are still grappling with the big ideas around place value, there we have, if you're familiar with the term SRBI, that's Student Research Based Interventions, there are supports that have been put in place, and thank you to the board and to the town of Fairfield that we have additional math science teachers to help support that intervention process. As well as the math science teachers going in and helping to collaborate and work with the classroom teachers on further differentiating to provide supports for students. Many of the problems in the beginning of our units are also much more open-ended and investigative, which allows students to enter the problem at their level of understanding, which again further allows teachers to support and scaffold their understanding as they're moving through the process, and then later in the units, that becomes more targeted and skill approached. And as far as extending the understanding, what we're looking at is students generally start off when they're learning new concepts, and this is regardless of the grade level or the concept. If it is new content to them or new understandings for them, they generally start in very concrete fashions. They need to build it, they need to see it, that's where you see the array models and that kind of thing. The example I shared of the grade 4 student who actually made the area model to help her compute. Once they understand that, they start to move more towards making generalizations, and they're able to apply it to specific similar problems. And then to stretch them even further, we want them to generalize that even further to, does this always work? Will it always work in different situations? And apply to new and different situations.
You mentioned that this curriculum is being taught now.
The mathematical practice standards are something that the teachers have been working on. We have been developing units to help implement. We have piloted some of these because we're trying to find resources that will help support. So we've been laying a lot of groundwork for the Common Core state standards. As of this past fall, we have done a lot of revision work to build the Common Core state standards to make sure that we're targeting and address for full implementation.
Have we had the opportunity to evaluate how this curriculum is going to work for us relative to what we know the expectations are, say, for middle school? Is there any kind of testing? I think we've had blue ribbon testing, but do we have any kind of arbitrary...
Oh, I see. Outside evaluation systems. We
Yeah.
do have the blue ribbon. We will be using that as one measure. We do have the Connecticut Mastery Test over the next couple of years as another measure. We also have been keeping internal data on fluency that students have been performing over the past several years. Just so that you're aware, the first day of every single unit that teachers will be implementing has some fluency component to it, so it's not only review, but it's also capturing information. on how students are performing over time. And we do implement district-wide 3 times a year a district fluency test. So these measures will help us as we're moving through from a much broader perspective. And again, we won't be able to answer this immediately, but there are a lot of revisions that are occurring the 6th through 8, and we'll be looking closely at how our students are performing as they're leaving the elementary grades into the middle school and entering the high school.
Yeah, you led me right to my next question, because I was going to ask you, it's obvious that you had elementary teachers work on this and, I assume, write a good component of this?
Yes.
The next question would be, I always look at where we're going to land. So what I'm thinking of, have 6th and 7th and 8th grade teachers looked at this and in terms of what they know the expectations are, because even if we're teaching something different, we still know, or the instructional approach is different. The content, I don't think has changed dramatically. We know we're going to be teaching algebra, geometry, trig, you follow. So what I'm wondering is whether or not the teachers that are in the middle school have looked at this and also agree that this looks like it's a good foundation.
The middle school teachers have looked at this. They have been working with the documents. My counterpart, Paul Rasmussen, from working with 6 through 12, has a vertical team that has been working with these documents already. So there are behind-the-scenes work that's already going on. I know he's been reviewing resources as well. Obviously, no decisions are made at this point, but they are planning to bring the curriculum documents forward next year.
So you do plan to have some kind of evaluation, and will you be coming back to the board with how that's working?
We will be monitoring the progress of how students are performing over time, and again, we'll be using some of those measures. And as far as the standards go, the standards that we're putting into place, the adjustments that I foresee, and again, there may be some adjustments in some of the instructional resources that teachers currently have, as the new assessment system comes out in 2015, we may need to, based on the results of that, again, that's going to be measuring the Common Core state standards, we may need to make some adjustments at that time. I don't expect that the standards will change as much as the resources that we're providing teachers, or greater emphasis on particular standards that we didn't emphasize as much as we should, and so forth.
And I know there are other people that want to have a chance, but my last question is, do you have common assessments that the faculty has agreed on so that you know what you're measuring and it's consistent throughout the district?
Yes, there are end-of-unit assessments for each of the assessments, and they involve both skills-based assessments as well as performance assessments.
I also think it's important to point out that the state is currently piloting new assessment items for that test that's going to be coming out in 2015. You probably understand that the CMT is going to be going away. The Common Core state standards are going to be measured against a new assessment, and they're currently piloting, and Fairfield is part of that as well, piloting assessment items to
Right, so
measure the effectiveness of the Common Core.
So you're actually going to have the opportunity to do testing here to see what that's going to look like?
Absolutely, yep.
Okay. Right, thank you.
Mr. Carey?
Thank you. And thank you, gentlemen, for the presentation. It was very informative. My first question is, in determining and designing this curriculum, or any curriculum, maybe appropriate to Dr. Rosado, how do we determine if the level of rigor is right for Fairfield? In other words, are we just reaching for whatever the caps say, or the Common Core curriculum, which is the new rage? How do we determine what the right fit is here, and if that should be the ceiling, or if we should be reaching for more?
Well, I think we start with in this particular case, what the Common Core requires us to do. So that is something that we really don't have an option. That's a non-negotiable. But in terms of going beyond that, we want to build into the curriculum documents, and I think you'll see them in these, opportunities to go well beyond that. What we've been living with for the last number of years has been the standards as outlined in the Connecticut Mastery Test, which I would consider to be, a relatively low, if you will, standard of proficiency to some degree. But we build into the documents opportunities for students to go well beyond that. And so we want our documents and our curriculum to be fluid so that the teachers have what they need to take kids who are ready to go beyond that, beyond it.
Okay, thank you. I'm just looking at my dueling curriculums here. I've got the mathematics curriculum, and we're also going to be voting on the art curriculum this evening. And I note the art curriculum on the right-hand column has some very specific skills and assessments that we want to see the students model at each level. And I don't see that in the math curriculum. I see essential questions, which falls in the middle column here of art. And my question is, do we have specific skills we want the students to be able to demonstrate from grade to grade?
Right.
And if so, how come they're not here?
If we made a strategic decision in terms of the actual curriculum document, the way that it's laid out, because the Common Core state standards, which were adopted in Connecticut in July of 2010, when they came to us, we needed then to take a look at our documents and say, how are we going to represent the Common Core and the activities that we want to present in the curriculum in an efficient way, given our format. The art curriculum does not have that. Currently, we only have Common Core in those two areas, language arts and math. And later this spring, when you see the elementary language arts curriculum, it'll look similar to the math document. And so we've changed the formatting a little bit just so that we could fit in the Common Core the way that we felt it would make sense.
Do you want to add to that, Walter?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you're looking at the formative and summative assessments, is that what you're referencing?
Referencing the art curriculum that I have before me, as opposed to the math curriculum that I have before me, and we have an extra column in art.
Okay, so it's more of a formatting of the document itself. I was just going to say, as far as what is being assessed in the mathematics documents, if you look directly at the standards, that's what the assessments are built on.
Generally speaking, can you just tell us how much of a departure this upgrade in the curriculum is from what we have right now in terms of what are the big separations, what are the big changes that we are being asked to implement here?
And just in an overview, the Common Core, the focus of the Common Core is to go deeper in understanding concept. At the elementary level, the primary focus really is on developing number sense and place value and computation with whole numbers, as well as getting into fractions and fractional understanding. So those are the major areas. And so so there has been some shifts as to where those might occur. So, for example, some of them have dropped down, and some of the standards that we formerly had have dropped down in a level, and there's been some shifting around. What is not found in the elementary levels, for example, is probability, which is what we currently have in many of our grade levels, and that has moved into the middle school. So that's just one example of some of the things that have shifted around.
Let me try it another way. If you looked at, say, third grade content under this document versus third grade content now, what percentage would the overlap be? Let's make it a math problem.
There's about 70% of an overlap. It varies by grade level.
Right.
Some grade level, there are more significant changes. So there are many, for example, in third grade, what we have had is multiplication, understanding multiplication and division. But formerly it was for 2, 5, and 10, and now it is to automaticity for 0 through 10. So even with that content, yes, it's very similar to the previous document, but there's been a little increased requirement as well in that standard.
Thank you, Dr. Tuttle. That helps answer. My last question, I don't want to monopolize time, as Mrs. Brand didn't either, but maybe it could be something that could be forwarded to us separately. I'd like to get an understanding of this spiraling approach that we're using and what the other one or two top competing approaches are and why we've chosen this one. So in other words, we have a pretty, and this is at the million-foot level, right? We have an approach that we've decided to take to mathematics here in Fairfield. It's around this concept, if I understand correctly. I'd like to understand how that would differ from other approaches and why we've placed our bet on this one.
We can certainly provide you with some definitions there, but just to be clear, this was something that chose us as well. I mean, the Common Core State Standards is not an option. We did need to go down the road, as did 47 other states that adopted these particular math standards. So we are on board with all of that, but we can certainly provide you some.
Yeah, and I'm not speaking directly to the standards, Dr. Rosado, as much as our approach to achieving them.
Okay, okay.
And I'll be very frank, my concern is if I look at this other wonderful document you gave me this evening, And I look at our capped area scores for the year that this came out, which I believe is 2 years back, we're, as a district, achieving 69.9% in mathematics. So as a board member, what I want to know is how we're going to move that number up and how this approach is going to help us achieve a much greater percentage of children meeting that goal and hopefully more.
Mrs. Brand, you had a follow-up on that?
Yeah, actually, I think what Mr. Carey was asking, please, Dr. Zato, correct me if I'm wrong, but inherent in the Common Core is the instructional methodology of doing the spiral. I think they're one and the same.
think so.
Does that help answer your question, Mr. Carey?
But actually,
If
there's-
that's actually, that
I have it right, there's less spiraling
That's
in the
correct.
new model than in the current model.
Yeah.
In other
That's-
words, right, that you're going to go deeper into a concept to mastery and then move on. Is that right?
And that's what I'm hoping you can
Right.
help me learn a little bit more about.
Less concepts, deeper.
So, in terms of the approach that we're taking, what the differences are, and if we can get a little more research on that, I'd appreciate it just for my own edification.
Mrs. Gerber?
Hi, thanks. I had a question just, I guess about kind of the basics, like learning your multiplication tables. What role does that play in this? Like just, how do you feel about rote memorization? You know, just knowing that 2 times 4 is 8 and being able to think about it without having to break things apart or anything like that. I mean, it seems as if, I'm dating myself, but you know, when I was in elementary school in 3rd grade, we learned our times tables. It was in the back of the black and white notebook, and you studied them and you memorized them, and 1 to 12, and you were all set. And you know, you knew by the end of that year exactly what all of those were. And now it seems as if it's not that way. I mean, some teachers do flashcards and things like that. Others do not. But there's not that memorization aspect to it. And I'd heard from people that was something that we've grown away from, and I was just curious as to why, and why is that causing a problem that you don't have that base, that you have to break things apart? Would it not be easier to know these things off the top of your head, or not? I don't know, I'm just asking.
I'm really glad you brought the question up, because I think it needs to be communicated to a greater audience, especially if that's the kind of comments that you're receiving. The basic facts and the understanding facts to automaticity is as important as it ever was. And it is, a matter of fact, it is expected by the end of grade 3, that students are 0 through 10, and at the end of grade 4, they're 0 through 12. So the basic operations are as important as they ever have been. Research does say, though, prematurely teaching procedural math, students have less of an understanding. Actually, it hinders understanding of more sophisticated ideas, which is why the example I shared with you of that early multiplication, students are understanding the concept of what is multiplication, what does it mean. We certainly would expect that a student, as they're beginning to build the understandings, that 5 times 7 example, they may break it apart to more friendly numbers, because they're shifting from additive thinking to a very huge shift in a 3rd grader's mind to multiplicative thinking, to think of equal groups. As they have developed the concept and are provided many opportunities to practice that in a variety of settings, we would certainly expect that they would be able to look at 5 times 7. And as a matter of fact, if you note, in the 4th grader would be using that type of problem to help solve more sophisticated problems involving multi-digit. And in grade 4, we'd expect them to be able to have strategies to approach multi-digit computation, just as we expect a 3rd grader to have those basic facts. So basic facts are as critical and are very important for students' problem solving. As I mentioned before, we have included that in the units as far as regular practice, as well as assessing it on a district-wide 3 times a year. So basic facts aren't going anywhere. They're very important for students' understanding, and we certainly expect that they have them mastered.
Thank you. I have a follow-up on that. How long have you been teaching the facts that way, and what data do you have behind it that supports that it's successful?
There's a lot of research, and actually, if you look at the construct of the Common Core state standards, that's essentially how they were developed. Just by way of example, long division, the longer division algorithm is introduced, long division is introduced in 3rd grade. It's carried over into 4th and 5th grade. As a matter of fact, it migrates into looking at understanding fractions as a division. And long division strategies are taught in 4th grade and continued in 5th grade, and mastery of the long division standard algorithm, as we understand it, is expected in 6th grade. So there are actually several years of developing conceptual understanding of what does a long division algorithm do, why does it work, how does it work. It's all coming from understanding of number and building that number sense. As I mentioned before, the priority in the elementary level is to really develop number sense, help student to estimate, and to determine whether problems are reasonable, to mentally compute. And if you think about the 21st century and the students and the world these kids are going into today, mental computation has become increasingly important. And we have, because when we get to larger computation problems, and I will say the long division algorithm is very efficient for large problems, they'll more than likely grab some piece of technology, cell phone, calculator, spreadsheet. But what's important is when they punch in those numbers, are they able to determine that the answer is accurate or at least within the ballpark? So it becomes a critical skill that we develop. So again, the expectation is students do learn the standard algorithms. It's just a matter of when. And that is a shift from perhaps the way we were taught.
I think that's the key point, is when. How long have we been doing this in Fairfield?
We have really took a look at our instructional model about 3 years ago, and we're looking across the district at how consistent our instructional model was. Our Scott Forsman textbook is a very traditional book, and so it approaches from a very standard algorithm in the earlier grades. So it was incumbent upon a teacher as to whether they used a variety of approaches. But as teachers have been working with the standards and looking at developing units, that system has been building, and we're looking to standardize an instructional model to implement across the district.
So the students that took the CAP tests that are certain that we're looking at now in the strategic school profile, they weren't necessarily using this math model.
Correct. Actually, that distributed property that I was highlighting during tonight's presentation is emphasized, I believe, on 1, possibly 2 pages in our textbook at each of the grade levels,
Right.
as opposed to consistently through. And so the majority of students would then meet those algebraic properties in algebra or pre-algebra, for example.
And then you actually brought it up, the Scott Forsman textbook. What textbook are we using? Is it Scott Forsman Addison,
Scott Forsman, Addison Wesley, it's a 2004 publication.
a 2004 publication?
Yes.
I have some concerns about, and I've asked to look at a copy of the textbook, but I'll just put some stuff out there briefly, and I will go through it myself before I cast final judgment. But I found it interesting, and I appreciate the fact that you pulled together the data on what other states are doing and where we are internationally. And one of the things that you pulled together was the state of California. And I'm not sure it's an apples to apples comparison. I'll take it home and look at it. But this particular textbook is on the state of California's not approved. So I'm just curious as to why you use this textbook and what you find beneficial from it. It didn't receive very good reviews from the limited research that I did.
All right. Before I was in this position, that textbook was adopted.
It's not a good answer.
That goes for me as well.
However,
We inherited.
what I would like to share with you, though, it's not that the mathematics is bad. What we're talking about is we have the standards here, and how are we developing the mathematical content and the ideas. And so it isn't the textbook that is our curriculum. It's the standards that are our curriculum, and the textbook becomes a resource that we use to help implement that curriculum. Right now, as we're moving forward, it is one of the many that are being proposed to help support what teachers are doing. So it's not a single book that we're using. And as a matter of fact, you'll find if you survey many of the districts, none of them rely on a single source textbook. They may purchase a primary program, but they will find that there are holes in the program that don't address the standards, and so they have to find alternative resources to help support those standards, help to implement them, and to support the teachers, or they're not strong enough in one area. Just to give you an example, our Scott Forsman textbook, I believe in grade 3, is 729 pages, and we have a 182-day school year. So there are an awful lot of things in that textbook where teachers are making judgments about what needs to be taught. So it really is the standards that drive our instruction, and the textbook becomes the support.
Did you look at?
Go ahead.
Did you look at changing the textbook? Do you feel there's a need to change the textbook as it's tied into the curriculum?
So here's the problem.
Yeah.
The textbook publishers have not kept up with the changes in the Common Core state standards. And we had a presentation here in this room with people from the State Department of Education about the mathematics and about the language arts standards. And the person presenting the math was asked point blank, we're doing a math adoption. What do you recommend we do? And they said, do not buy a new textbook right now. The publishers have not come up with, haven't had the lead time to come up with a textbook that matches to the Common Core state standards. So basically, we're creating resources, the teachers are creating resources for each other along with Mr. Wakeman and others. And we would anticipate in the next year or two that we're going to have a change. But right now, if we were to recommend a textbook to you, we don't think it would be money well spent. And so we'll use, as I understand this, we'll use what we can out of the existing textbook, knowing that that's a very, that's just a piece of the resources available to teachers.
So you're
Yeah.
using what you think is good in the textbook and you're
Right.
supplementing in other areas.
And as I mentioned before, it's a very traditional text. It's good for practicing skills. If they've learned the multiplication, they understand the basic facts, there's some great pages in there to practice basic facts, that kind of thing. For developing some conceptual understanding, we're utilizing some other resources that are available to us.
Marilyn Burns stuff.
Good. Thank you. I'm sorry, I ponied off of your other stuff. Go ahead.
Actually, this is kind of related to what you were just talking about. So I guess I just did an informal poll of different elementary school parents, and it seems like some schools don't use the textbook barely at all, while others do. Is there some rhyme or reason to that, or is that at the discretion of the school or of the teacher, or?
As we're moving forward with the implementation of this, the new instructional model, there are guides with these new units and recommendations on the resources to use to help provide structure for teachers so that they are, that align with the Common Core state standards and address those standards directly. And there'll be recommendations in there as to whether it's a Scott Forsman text or whether it's another text or some other place where teachers need to go to find resources.
Right.
So we're working towards consistency. Anybody else? Mr. Convertito?
Okay. Since you've opened up Pandora's box, I'm going to jump into it. District fluency tests done 3 times a year. And I assume those are matched to the standards that are set forth in the curriculum by grade level.
There are, right, they're 0 through 10 in grade 3, 0 through 12 in grade 4 and 5.
Okay. One of the issues I have as a board member when a new curriculum is presented to me is what I like to know is where did the old curriculum fail short and how does the new curriculum correct that? And this is my second time through a curriculum issue on the board, and I haven't seen it either time. And I think it's crucial for us as board members, if you're asking us to approve a new curriculum, to know what it corrects about the old curriculum and what it brings forward from the old curriculum, and how it remedies those problems. Dr. Rosado, you said that the CMT is a fairly low standard, okay? Again, referring back to the document that Mr. Kerry referred to, in grades 3 through 8, we score, in the 80 to mid-80 percentile. And then we have what I find an alarming drop from grade 8 at 86.8% to the high school level at 69.9% in mathematics. And I understand that this is only a grade 3, 4, and 5 curriculum. But to me, when you're going to come forward with me for something for high school, I want to know why that differential exists and what we're doing to correct that.
Well, it's important to know that the CMT and the CAPT are two different
I understand
assessments,
that.
and that the CAPT is far more rigorous, number
Okay.
one. Also, what's reported are the number of, when I say it's a low standard, what I'm talking about is the proficiency level that we're expecting of students. So we're expecting a higher standard than just at the proficiency level when I suggest that. But the CAPT is a very different assessment, especially in mathematics, than the CMT. So you really can't look at the two of them together.
So
Let me just give you just some data on that. Just looking at the strategic school profile, you can see, for example, that the state average percentage goal drops dramatically. About, in other words, in grade 8 mathematics, we perform about 20 percentage points higher than the state average, about 87 versus 67. You can see at the state drops from 66.6 to 49.5. And this happens in all the subjects for CAPT. And so I think to compare the percentage goal on any of the CMT grades with the 10th grade test is, there's usually a big drop-off there. Obviously, we always want to do better, but there's a big difference in the tests between 8th grade and 10th grade.
And I understand
So
that.
that's just an informational point. It's,
Okay.
yep.
And, I can see where we score higher than the rest of the state average, but if we're scoring in grades 3 through 8 in the 80 percentile on a CMT, I would suspect that, based on what's been said, that on our district fluency test, we would score less than the 80% if that's a higher standard.
The district fluency test, you're talking the 3 times a year?
Yes.
Okay, what we're looking at is what is the typical performance of a 3rd grader, a 4th grader, and a 5th grader? Essentially, how many problems are they able to compute within a minute?
Okay.
And we've been establishing district averages for that. And just to give you some indication, we're looking at a typical 3rd grader does about 3 seconds a problem, or 20 problems in a minute. And a typical 5th grader, or the average 5th grader, I should say, is believe 30 problems in a minute, 2 seconds a problem, which actually, as far as research says, is even above and beyond what they need to be able to successfully compute as they're moving through
I think
other
there's a,
grades.
just jumping in, John, I think the distinction is that the CMT tests a lot more than just fluency, right? It's testing 25 different strands, from basic computation to fabulous strand 25, integrated understandings that we all struggle with. As the fluency that Walter's talking about is just the fluency computation piece. So I don't think it's a apples-to-apples comparison to say
is
how a
not.
kid does on the fluency would equate with how the kid, the percentages. I think the closer match we have, it's still not perfect, because there is no perfect match. The closer match is the blue ribbon testing.
Correct.
All right, which is given 3 times a year as well. And that's that's more comprehensive. And I think we believe that is more predictive of how kids are doing on CMT than the fluency is, because the fluency is a narrow slice.
So my question is this, if I'm understanding this. The district fluency testing is testing how well this curriculum is being delivered to our students.
No.
Just that small slice of it.
It's just,
That section that you're testing, I assume that the
Computation
3
of
times a
facts.
year.
It's computation.
of facts, of math.
right, and it's one of the indicators.
Is it the same test administered 3 times a year, or is it 3 different
Yes.
tests?
It's the same test, it's the same level of difficulty 3 times a year. And the same thing occurs with the blue ribbon assessment as well, which is our screening tool that we use 3 times a year for grades 3, 4, and 5. It is the same level of difficulty in the beginning of the year, so students we may not perform, or we would not expect them to perform as well as they do in the middle of the year. And again, we would expect them to perform even better at the end of the year. But I just want to echo what Dr. Teitel said about the blue ribbon test assesses more strands, similar to the Connecticut Mastery Test, and will be a better indicator.
Okay. I guess what I'm trying to get at is how do you assess how well the curriculum is performing or how well it's being delivered? If the blue ribbon test is a test not designed by us, okay?
Right, it's an outside
The
measure.
fluency test is our test, right? So what standard do we match that? And I'm not trying to be difficult, I'm just trying to understand how it's measured and how we assess it, or how you assess it, to where it succeeds and where it fails and what has to be tweaked.
Okay, well, some of there are a variety of strands within blue ribbon, for example. One of the areas that is consistently challenging, and this is not only for Fairfield but across the state of Connecticut, is estimating solutions to problems, as well as the strand 25, and that's integrated problem, that's being able to problem solve with multi-steps problems, similar to some of the examples I shared with you this evening. And so we're looking at some of those indicators as a way to demonstrate growth, and that the program is effectively targeting those.
Okay. And just so you understand where I'm coming from, the state now is looking at dropping CMT testings, which for whatever reason, used to be held as a standard. And I just want to make sure we have an assessment in place that tells us this is working or it's not working and what has to be tweaked on it. And that's why, when I started my comments, you know, I would love to see where the old one doesn't do what you want it to do and how the new one achieves that. And that's sort of my background on this inquisition. My last question is, and it was sort of alluded to with not having a textbook at this point in time, is there a budget impact instituting this curriculum next year, because we won't be using the textbook as much, which we already have in hand, and we using, I assume, a lot more supplemental material?
There is a budget impact, however, it is already in the current budget.
Okay.
I would say the majority of that is, or a good piece of that is in professional development for teachers, because we are working with teachers to help them understand not only the Common Core state standards, but translating Common Core state standards, what does that actually look like in a classroom? And the mathematical practices, again, I shared with you a few snapshots of what that might look like in a classroom, but that isn't something that happens overnight. It is something that needs to be cultivated and developed, and it isn't just sort of a quick, here's the professional development on it. Again, support from the math science teachers to work alongside with teachers in that, and so there are other implications as well as purchasing some support resources that would go along to address the Common Core state standards. But
And
that is in our current budget.
We've addressed all of this. Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Jennifer? Nellie, I'm sorry.
Most of my questions are sort of piggybacking on previous ones. I'm jumping ahead to the high school curriculum, a specific snapshot question. For example, on page 6 of the PowerPoint presentation, where you have the example with the lemonade of 3.5 times 4. I mean, very, very specific example. Is there something in all of this computation that translates into better high school performance that I'm not aware of, that you can't just make it into an improper fraction, multiply by 4, and simplify?
You can.
That's what one of the things I'm curious about, because that's an argument for the curriculum, and that's what I'd be curious
Yes,
to hear.
You can, and actually, this is where the grade 5 students will be exploring that as well. These are samples that have been selected from many samples. For example, there were some that I chose not actually many, I chose not to include in the slides. What I tried to do was to give you an example of essentially how our algebraic properties that are in high school courses done in the elementary school with whole numbers, and then how do we start to migrate as we move into looking at rational numbers. In this case, we're looking at fractions. And so that is the specific examples that I chose for this to illustrate that. So it will, the more efficient strategies, and this is part of what, it's a developmental continuum as students are starting to comprehend what does it mean when you're multiplying by a mixed number, or what does it mean when you're multiplying by a fraction. Just the idea that multiplying by a fraction can yield a smaller product, or same size, or even greater, depending on what the fraction is. These are all really big ideas for students to grapple with, and this is what they are. This is the level of understanding that they're working on at the elementary level.
And so there's some, this comes back to Mrs. Gerber's question of, you know, did the rote memorization, we learned how to solve the problems, but that somewhere out there is research that confirms that this, in fact, will deepen understanding and improve performance at the advanced level mathematics.
So this is the shift that is occurring. It is developing much deeper sense of understanding of numbers, number relationships, how numbers work, how the operations work, so that they can be applied to more sophisticated problems. And the foundational work that is really the elementary responsibility is in the whole number sense understanding. And even, again, another big idea for third graders is understanding fractions as an actual number, that it is actually part of a whole. That whole concept is a major shift for children at that age, and it continues to develop through grade 5. As we move into grade 6, you'll note that if you look in the Common Core State document itself, it really starts to shift towards looking at proportional reasoning, which is a much more sophisticated skill than what we're doing at the elementary level. So.
Okay. And I assume within the classroom that when you're teaching some of the standard algorithms and then breaking them out into there are different ways to actually solve this, I know one thing that can get very frustrating for children is when they feel like, I got this, why are you making me do 3 other versions of solving this problem when I've got this? And is that part of this? I mean, that the teachers are explicitly instructed, no, they must know that there are 4 options?
That is not part of.
Or can they stay with their comfort level?
You're bringing up a good question. I will try to be succinct in my response. Just by way of example, the student may understand the standard algorithm and use it, or may be very familiar with the procedure. What's important is, do they understand why that procedure works? And just by way of example is, if I'm buying rolls of wrapping paper for $1.99 and I'm buying 3 of them, or I might use a standard algorithm to solve the problem, or I might find it more efficient just to round up and subtract 3 pennies. That may be a more efficient way, but there isn't a right way as long as you find the solution. What provides the rich conversation is, what's the most efficient way? And sometimes the standard algorithm is the most efficient way. It's important that students do understand and know that standard algorithm. Where it becomes more of an issue is if a student is relying on it as a procedure but doesn't understand in a broader context and can't do, for example, that 199 times 3 and be able to think about it in alternative ways. So what we're really encouraging students to do is to look at the numbers first and then decide on which operation or which strategy would be the best and most efficient to attack the problem.
And on that point, to the board regarding the curriculum, just one snapshot story. My daughter's in 5th grade and was doing group work on math where the students had to explain how they solved the problem, and the teacher almost had to break up a very vociferous argument because, involving my daughter, but because they really hadn't wrapped their mind around the idea that you could actually have 2 different ways to solve it. And they were saying, no, my way's right, my way's right. And I will say this, it was a very impressive moment for them to realize that they could both be right, and I thought that was a valuable part about this. One thing I'd be also concerned about with the teachers is that this is extremely time-consuming. And that's not something you can exactly answer, but the nature of the slides that you were showing, I know what that involves in a classroom. And I could easily see there being curriculum impact elsewhere to achieve this. And I'd throw that out there as a cautionary tale to avid math people that...
Just to address that, because I don't want to leave that hanging. The Common Core state standards, as you know, that has been, the emphasis has been going on a deeper understanding, and that does take time to develop that deeper understanding. However, the number of standards is lessened and have been shifted to other grade levels. So it affords us that time to really develop these ideas and those concepts. And again, take it with close look at how the standards are developed across the grade levels. You'll see that the continuum helps to foster that thinking as well.
Good point. And I just had one more question, and this sort of gets back to one thing that Mr. Convertito was saying. Something I've heard of for years off and on with different degrees of passion is the sense that, try as we might, this isn't being done equally across the district. That certain schools are known for having their little trick with math that other schools don't, and as much as we try to oversee it. And so, again, just tossing it out there that on the topic of common assessment, I would very much hope that at some point when this really is getting implemented, that we have something self-made perhaps, because that way we know it's to our curriculum, that whether it's delivered at the end of 5th and compared or delivered at the beginning of 6th, so that the middle school teachers are, that there's a quantifiable way to say, this is happening at this school better than it is at this school, and we need to take a look at that, because that's one of the things that I think Fairfield prides itself on, is that a student could pick up and move from one elementary school to another, and it's seamless, and they've got it. And again, I'd just like to put that out there, that I would like that assessed.
Yeah, just to make a point with respect to that is, we're moving forward with a common set of standards for all students at a particular grade level, at a given grade level. So for example, grade 3, all students at grade 3 will be expected to meet those standards, and that's what we're working towards. We have also been developing, as you saw with the pacing guides that I showed, that development through the development of the units, as well as a pacing guide for the implementation of those units, as well as standardizing and ensuring that there is a set time of instruction, 60 minutes of mathematics instruction every day. and sort of moving that across the district. Part of what you may be referencing is differentiation practices, which we expect differentiation. There are opportunities and times where it's very important for students to be heterogeneously mixed, to share their thinking and alternative strategies and different ways, and to be able to look and determine whether a strategy is more efficient than another. There are other times where it is more skill, and we may address, and I'm talking at whichever end of the spectrum you want to talk about, where students are scaffolded and are supported for further learning.
I hear what you're saying, I understand all of that, but at the end of the day, if Mill Hill is significantly outscoring Sherman, I want to know why. And I think they deserve to know why. And it could very well be a case of, of professional development time and giving those teachers time to collaborate. What strategies have you developed? I mean, teachers aren't robots. We can devise curriculum the best we can. Some are going to deliver it better than others. Some simply have more experience. But it's just that awareness. If one elementary school, all the data together, is outperforming another, I just want attention being, brought to that and it explicitly being addressed.
Right.
Thank you. I just want to remind everybody the time it's 8:30, but we're having a hardcore curriculum discussion, which is a wonderful thing. Does anybody else have any questions? Mr. Dwyer.
When you go last, you get to follow up on what you thought the question meant. I thought where Mrs. Brand was going is each teacher works off of the students where they were prepared the prior year. And were 6th through 12th grade teachers engaged not in preparing their own curriculum for their own grades, but were they reviewing what was happening in this curriculum so that they'd know, 3 through 5, the students will be prepared for what we think we need to do in 6 through 12. Were they engaged from that perspective, or are they just looking at their own grade level curriculum?
You're looking at you're referring to the middle school folks? And okay. From the middle school, they're looking at the documents right now and the Common Core state standards and understanding what the standards are asking of them. Currently, the practice, and this is a part of that spiraling too, there are some review of previous standards from previous grade levels. Eventually, as we're moving into 2015 and full implementation of the Common Core state standards, I would suspect that would diminish significantly because the expectation is mastery at the end of the grade level of
Let me try
specific
again.
content.
Were 6th, 7th, and 8th grade teachers engaged in reviewing the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade curriculum?
They were in reviewing the standards documents, but not the actual curriculum documents.
The standards themselves.
The standards themselves, yes.
And where I thought Mrs. Brand was going is, if we don't have the right means and methods of teaching curriculum K through 5, then when those students hit middle school, and the same thing happens if we don't have the right curriculum and means and methods of teaching in 6 through 8, then the 9th through 12th graders, the teachers are impacted by that. And I thought that's where Mrs. Brand's question was going.
I think one thing about this is that the Common Core state standards, if they're your backbone of your document, they're developed so that if we do an effective job of teaching the standards in grades 3 to 5, that does prepare them for grade 6 and so forth, and the standards are laid out that way. Right. So that's a protection that if we do a good job with these standards as written and they meet the standards, then the kids will be ready for the standards in grade 6 and so forth. So that's the that's the assumption under which you work, because this is going to be a shift. It's going to be a shift in grade 6 and 7 and 8. It's not just a shift at the elementary level. So that's the that's the process there.
Also, it's also fair to say that the middle school teachers who are currently working on their documents, they have these Common Core standards as their guide, and so they can see and do see what's expected in K through 5 and how it builds into the middle school program. They actually are the ones in the middle, so they are seeing what's coming before and after. But the Common Core does become the the backbone for all of it. And so, though they were not involved directly in writing these particular curriculum documents, they're well aware, the middle school teachers, of the standards and what the kids should be coming in with as they write their own.
The second question I have is, I wasn't quite clear on the conversation between Mr. Carey and Mrs. Brand, that the Common Core standards say, here's what you need to achieve, but the means and methods and the resources that we use are at the option of the local school district, or do they also say, this is the means and methods that you should teach by?
No, the means and methods are at the discretion of the school district to a degree. The standards are there.
Yeah.
And the assessments that are coming down the pike that we're currently beginning to pilot will be standardized. And so we know what the end will be,
Yeah,
and we know what
okay.
the standards are, but how we get there is really up to us.
Okay, so therefore, you indicated that there was research behind, my phrase, the means and methods that we've chosen. I presume because we're talking about education, there's an equal amount of professors out there that have done research that disagree with something. Within the math curriculum team, was there a lot of debate as to, there's 2 or 3 different methods out there, and let's chat about that.
There is discussion about that. I would also just like to redirect you to looking at the Common Core State Standard Mathematical Practices that are in the document itself, yes.
Handed out tonight.
Right.
Yeah.
And what students are, it's how students are expected to communicate their thinking. And those mathematical practices in and of themselves require a shift from, I will say, a traditional approach to what is typically a U.S. model of instruction. And that, in part, is the intent of these documents.
Yeah, okay. And the last question, you mentioned that benchmarking to some of the, over to Singapore and Japan and whatnot, but also benchmarking to Fairfield County, the long-term goal that we established back in '04, apparently when the textbook that you referenced was published, is that we would, our school district would achieve and rank with the best in the nation. And I guess the question overall that a lot of people have been asking is, does this curriculum help us achieve that goal? Are we benchmarked well against high-achieving school districts around the nation?
Currently, Fairfield does quite well as far as the textbook and where we're going. I think that there are areas for improvement. I think what we're looking at as far as the Common Core State documents, Common Core documents, and the new curriculum documents that are coming forward. There's a lot of research that supports less is more. Just to give you an example, in the international assessments, the U.S. Teaches almost 90 to 100% of what's on those international assessments, whereas some of the highest performing countries teach approximately 50% and outperform the United States. So that, and they also spend much more of their time focusing on in-depth instruction in number and place value at the primary grade, so there is research that supports that as well. So the conversation has moved from how is Fairfield performing in comparison to our DIRG to how are our students going, how prepared are they for a more global and international market?
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Mrs. Brand.
Actually, since we are late, will we have the privilege of this gentleman again in a couple of weeks before we approve it? Because I can wait to ask it later if that
Sure.
helps.
No, he'll be back.
Okay, if that helps, because I'm looking at the hour.
Arnold
and
Schwarzenegger.
Yeah,
He's the mathematical Arnold Schwarzenegger.
yeah, I know time's an issue, so
He'll be back.
Thank you. Thank
No, he'll
you.
be back. It'll be at the next meeting, yes, Sue.
I just do want to thank you, and in summation, I did note that there were 23 staff members who were a part of your committee, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say they're all backing this, and this is what they want to see in the classrooms.
We've seen some very passionate work by teachers and a lot of heavy lifting this year in helping to understand the documents and translating what they actually mean. So hats off. I cannot say enough about the quality of the teachers in this district and the work that they have done so far to help move this initiative forward.
Great. And then just on one note in summary, I concur with Mr. Convertito. I think going forward, if the board can get in our document how the new curriculum, and this applies to all curriculum, how the new curriculum is better than the the previous curriculum, I think that would be helpful to us.
I made a note of that.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you for this discussion. It was excellent.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you. And thank you to the staff for all your work on this. We have a
Thank you,
lot
and
of
thank you
tireless,
for all being here this evening.
right, tireless math champions that we have.
Okay. Oh, we have to approve minutes. Okay. Next item is approval of the regular meeting minutes of February 28th. The recommended motion is that the Board of Education approve the minutes of the regular meeting of February 28th, 2012. Moved by Mrs. Brand, seconded by Mrs. Gerber. Is there any discussion? Mr. Convertito.
Item 7, old business. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Item 7, old business. It's just a typographical error. Mr. Dwyer, who has, at her discretion, should say at his discretion.
Oh, okay.
No, in her direction. Stan,
Oh, okay.
his direction, Mr. Dwyer.
So Jennifer might want to suggest whether there's a sentence
Well,
out of order here, but
no, Mrs. Iacono turned this item over to Mr. Dwyer, who has at her, meaning Ms. Iacono's direction, been working with the appropriate town officials and Dr. Tuttle in trying to resolve this.
Okay, fine.
Thank you. Anything else? All in favor? Okay, it's unanimous. Committee reports. Ludlow High School.
Tag team.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
At Ludlow, as far as social and school spirit events go, we have our annual Battle of the Houses next Friday. So for those of you who don't know what that is, we have 3 separate houses and we have sort of obstacle courses and competitions for raising school spirit. And that's next Friday, so we're very excited for that. The sophomore dance will be held next weekend as well. The PTA held a great fashion show this past weekend where the seniors dress up and wear clothing from local stores. Yeah. And we raised lots of money. It was very well attended and great fun. Also, the senior class and the junior class are amidst prom planning. And we have a special senior student who is doing a program called Project POST, which stands for Promoting Optimism, Spreading Tolerance, and that was last Friday, and all throughout the day she read inspirational things over the announcements, and people pledged to be happy and kind to others, so that was nice as well. As far as sports go, spring sports are beginning, tryouts are happening right now. Boys, it was combined, Ward and Ludlow ski team won states a few weeks ago, and the
Awesome.
girls were the runners-up, so that was great. Okay. The girls' gymnastics team also had a great season. They came in 3rd in the FCAC competition and 4th in states, and our cheerleading team as well placed 1st in FCACs and 2nd in states. So a good winter sports season and a good spring season coming up. As far as academics go, the Connecticut Challenge team competed today in the state finals against Wilton in New York. It's a group of students who compete in a scholastic competition against schools throughout Connecticut and throughout other states as well. They competed against Wilton today. The internship program is continuing. Students are beginning to meet with the faculty who are their advisors and mentors and visit their internship sites to get a feel of what the job will be like for the spring. We're currently in the middle of CAPT testing. This is our 2nd week, and CAPT testing finishes on Friday. The California trip is coming up for the music department students, and the music students will be performing in Disneyland. It's at the end of March and beginning of April. The French students recently returned from their trip to France. It was over February break. And on the math note, tomorrow is Pi Day, and the Math Honor Society, Mu Alpha Theta, has been planning the events for Pi Day. There's Pi Day T-shirts and a competition where students can write poems and songs and make baked goods all centered around pie to celebrate the day. Thank you.
Excellent.
Very appropriate.
Ward High School.
For academics, the CAP testing for the sophomore class is in its 2nd week. Testing concludes this Friday. 4 students were prize winners at the Ferguson Library Art Show in Stamford. And 14 FWHS band, chorus, and orchestra students auditioned and were selected for the All-State Music Festival in Hartford in April. For athletics, the winter sports season has come to a close and spring sports tryouts start next week. All of our teams competed in state-level contests for winter sports. The boys ski team captured the state championship for the third consecutive year. The girls were undefeated and placed second in state. In indoor track, Harry Warnick placed first in the mile run in the New England Championships held in Boston this past weekend and was recently named All-American. For extracurriculars, the FWHS math team finished second in the Fairfield County Math League. The team has qualified for the state and New England competition later this month. The FWHS dance team had a great showing at the state dance competition and will be moving on to New England's this month. And this Friday, the annual Interact Club talent show, Harmony for Hunger, will have their talent show, and the fundraising will go towards a program to raise money for hunger. I'm not that sure about it. And sorry. Next Friday, March 23rd, there will be the 9th grade and 10th grade dance at 7 to 10 p.m. in the gym. And the 9th grade forum on underage drinking for 9th grade students and their parents will be held on Thursday evening, March 29th. And we also would like to honor Mr. Fry, Ms. Felke, and Ms. Narkowitz for the Brian Fan Grants by the PTA Council to support their students in educational leadership and school administration. That's it.
I just want to take 1 second to say, I know there were some members of the audience who were wondering when public comment is. I just want to tell everybody that's at the end of the meeting. Mrs. Brand?
I actually was not able to make I was ill last night for the Board of Health meeting, but I talked to Sans Cleary, so he gave me the updates. As the board members have already heard, there was testing done at the PCBs at Fairfield Ludlow High Schools. The dust wipe came up at 1.6, which is well below the 10 micrograms that would even be considered an issue. And as Sans explained to me, he is in the process of developing a letter and has verified his information with the Department of Public Health, but went on to say that, that relative to PCBs, the exposure has to happen at high levels over long-term, multiple years, not short-term. And again, they're working in conjunction with the school district in terms of what the remediation will look like and how to manage that. Further, they have Joanne Ryan, who's the head of nursing in the school district, is also going to be discussing with the State Department of Ed what legally qualifies for extracurricular activities so they can figure out how to delegate and how much latitude they have relative to when they go on extracurricular trips, who can actually administer medication. What is in the code doesn't really spell it out, but what the State Department and what the attorney locally has felt, that the interpretation of the intent is that they can't delegate, but they're going back to verify that. As well as Dr. McDonald is the medical advisor for the school district, the town, and the Board of Health. And what I was relaying to the Board of Health, I can't remember now, several meetings back, when we were going to be reviewing our policy or establishing a policy for concussions because of the change in legislation, that they invited Dr. McDonald to review medically what his thoughts were on that. And he has actually written up assessment, which I will be forwarding to Jen Kennelly, and I believe is going to be forwarded to Dr. Title as well. It doesn't have any specific recommendations, but it is a review of what is current practice and what the district decides to do with it. But he did take a great deal of time and was really very helpful in that. Further, Jen Carolyn, who is the head of Tools for Schools for PTA Council, spoke with Sans Cleary and was interested in if there could be a way of systematically collecting non-acute data about complaints relative to indoor air qualities or other issues that had to do with the building relative to Tools for Schools. And most recently, there was a police, fire, and central office review and refresher for how to manage when you have white powder which is clearly not the issue if it's just white powder, but how to manage it if it is in an envelope and it is delivered. I think, and relative to the next one, there's actually another one because I think Mr. Dwyer was not able to attend the CES report, so I can do that if you want, or I can wait till you get there.
Well, if it's quick, because we'd like to keep the reports to 2 minutes, under 2
Okay.
minutes.
The CES report, the State Board of Ed, Terry Jones and Stephen Wright came to visit and answered questions. They were very thorough. They were very supportive of the governor's agenda. The Regional Center of the Arts has an open house March 10th, March 13th. There has been a great deal of professional development, and they're also involved in initiating the Academy of Academic Supports for grade 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th, as well as high school, and those are done on Saturday programs. There's training in differentiation, personal finance for students. They're teaching the teachers how to teach that, and requests for a lot of, obviously, early childhood education. There was also discussion about the ECS formula and how it is basically we are at a frozen level because the legislature has overridden, so we're pretty much at the same level that we were in 2009, and that will continue until 2013. And there's an update on the non-discrimination policy, and I don't know whether or not our current policy is up to date or not, but I did know that the CES had a change in theirs relative to the recent legislation. And there is also a special program that I actually shared with my friends to my right that there is for students who are on boards of education. Any board member, anyone who really wants to go can go with that. And that's at the CES website. That's on April 2nd. And I've actually been meeting with the subcommittee for finance for CES to prepare their upcoming budget. And that will be coming up in about May. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Convertito.
Special Projects Standing Building Committee met last week briefly to approve some change orders. There's been some frustration with the committee dealing with the architect and the contractor as far as the scheduling and moving things along. I did drive, a lot of it had to do with windows and ductwork. I did drive by today and noticed that about half the windows in the new addition are in now. We are meeting on Monday, which I assume there'll be a lot of finger pointing and a lot of back and forth on it. They've used a portion of the contingency right now, and the finger pointing is basically, you know, who caused this, why are we having to do this, and so forth. And I will get you a synopsis after the meeting on Monday and get it to the board members by email.
Thank you. Mr. Dwyer.
The Building Projects Review Committee met, second meeting. Two primary issues on the agenda. One that I'll say, quote, got resolved relative to a recommendation, and that is to create a clear calendar for the capitals budget that would allow its presentation, review, and approval earlier than the operating budget, so that it was separated those two workloads as well as it was clearly out there. The ultimate recommendation will be for all of the boards to consider is if the Board of Ed could, at their October meeting, approve the capital budget so that it could begin getting reviewed by the Board of Selectmen, Finance, RTM, starting in December. We could wait until the December meeting because the timing of how things work, we could do that. In election years, where you have the possibility of some members of the board turning over, there might be the question saying, does the, quote, old board vote a capital budget in October that the new board will be bringing forward? And if the new board gets a capital budget at literally one of their first meetings, are they prepared to approve such a capital budget? So at some later point, this board should give me some direction as to how they're feeling on that kind of question, but the committee clearly has an interest in moving this process sooner so that we can separate the workload as well as the approval process. There was some conversation about what projects should qualify for the capital non-reoccurring projects and what we should just put in operating, but that was a question and there was no real direction.
Mrs. Brand, you have a question?
Yeah, I wondered if it'd be possible to even back the capital presentation or request, if you will, earlier so that we wouldn't run into the November, December issue at all. Because we actually do, I know, a facilities review. They look at it at the end of the summer to see where their progress is. If it was even, and I know Dr. Title's looking at me, whether we could back it up.
No, I think, no,
The,
oh, go ahead.
the thought process was that December would be the soonest the Board of Selectmen. When we start and make the final decision is up to the Board of Ed, so we could move it back as far as we want.
Right.
But of course, there's always staff implications for that, so I think that's part of the larger discussion that we have at another time, so that the next time I go back to the committee, I can at least say, yes, we're on board to getting it submitted by December, and then we'll talk among ourselves as to, you know, the timetable from there that allows us to get to that.
Right, yeah, we're, because we're working off an approved document, the approved long-term capital, there's not that much guessing about what we're going to put in.
Right.
And so, my initial thought was, have the board finish it October, send it over to the selectmen, and then when they are comfortable bringing it up, it could be, if it's an election year, they'll do it in December. The important thing for us, aside from the timing issue, one of the timing issues is, I really want to avoid having RTM consider this during the same month that we're going through other meetings with the finance and big, heavy Board of Ed meetings. So in other words, January is also a bad month for us to go to RTM with this, because January is, we've got a lot of our own meetings. We have 4 meetings in a compressed time frame. And, March isn't great, and April isn't great. So really, we want to set this up so that maybe the RTM would take it up in February. Might work out the best. So those are the things we're trying to sort out, to try to make sure that, we're not out, too much and not able to focus. So that's kind of the whole strategy. I think we can get it to you in September and have it through in October, and then take it from there.
Anything else?
Yeah.
Mr. Federby?
Okay. The scheduled meeting for the Stratford Building Committee was postponed.
Oh.
I don't know when the new one's scheduled. And there has been no referrals to the Transportation Safety Advisors that I'm aware of. So it's a very short report.
Thank you.
Everything's been resolved.
Excellent. Okey dokey. Mrs. Gerber?
Parks and Rec hasn't met since our last meeting, so I have no report.
Excellent.
Excellent. You win the prize.
I have no report coming out of the RTM at this time. Mrs. Canali?
I do have a report. First, for SEPTA, they haven't had a meeting since our last meeting, but they do have a meeting tomorrow, which I believe the PTAs have been advertising. It's with a focus on executive functioning. The description that went out, described a series of potential behaviors in our children that if you see anything there that strikes a chord with you, that you might, be especially interested in going to the meeting. It's tomorrow night at 7:30 at McKinley, and it deals with the idea of identifying deficits, perhaps seeing the impact on student learning, if they do have issues with executive functioning, or you think they might. Obviously, the earlier you can ever identify something like that, the better you can aid in their education. So again, that's tomorrow night. Regarding policy, obviously later on the agenda, we'll talk about the discipline paperwork, and that's a separate issue that the policy talked about. A lot of our discussion at the policy meeting focused around the handbook that Mr. Dwyer has been putting together, and that we're looking to bring before the board with content. So far, the board has seen the table of contents and basically gave a favorable review to that. But where our discussion in the policy committee really kind of came to a standstill, and we were looking for a little bit of direction from the board, involved just how much discussion it was appropriate for this handbook to generate, and that we're looking for some feedback from the board on that. And by that, when I use the word appropriate, Mr. Dwyer has been doing a very careful job as he's gathering some content with providing the sourcing of it. And some sourcing, and therefore we would think its inclusion in the handbook, would not be controversial. If something has as its source our own bylaws, our own board policy, it's simply taking information like that and consolidating it in a handbook so that, for example, a new board member can be brought up to speed on expectations more quickly. But then there are other issues which fall outside of bylaws and policy. For example, CABE recommendations. An example of something like that would be CABE has published, and we generally subscribe to a lot of what CABE says, parameters for open board discussion. That's one specific example. And it's published. Is it appropriate to include in our handbook as a guide? There are also recommended practices, for example, from previous board retreats. I have not been a part of those, but those are things that the board would have met, talked about, and formed some kind of consensus. I can't speak to how that happened because I haven't been a part of it. But are those ideas appropriate to include in this if it's something that the board has talked about? Case in point for that would be something like minutes are kept in accordance with state law and Fairfield Town Charter. The idea that, I took some notes of examples. One, coming out of board retreat was the idea that it was expressed that the Hope Board of Ed members would make every effort to attend meetings during the budget cycle of the other town bodies, Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen. Now, that's not something that comes out of bylaws and policy, and yet it's a piece of information that might be useful to a new board member. Can it be included? Is it appropriate to be included? And so that's where I think we're coming back to the board, looking for a little bit more feedback in terms of there are certain things, as I said, bylaws and policy would seem to be no-brainers. Other things that are considered part of standard practice but not yet written down, to what extent can it be put in there? Because we certainly had some very lively discussion on the direction that this handbook should take. And I hope that all made sense, but so I put that out to the board.
All right, great. Can people send their feedback in to Mrs. Kennelly and let her take that up at the next policy committee, unless anybody has anything they want to offer up now? All right. Mrs. Brand?
There was only one piece, but I know the board is familiar with it, that I wasn't comfortable with, and that was when I, as a board member, have a request for information. And what has been the practice of previous boards with Mr. Mottola, as well as myself and Mrs. Albin, quite frankly, as far back as I can remember, is that board members would always copy the chair, and I think it is appropriate to do so, and request any information from Dr. Title. What I don't think is a good idea, because I do think it's a critical piece of, I think, how board members have to do their work, is to send the request to the chair and not copy the superintendent. To me, we should have, it's an access issue, and I think it does impact our ability to meet the state statutes. So I've expressed that, but I feel it would be appropriate to do so now. I know I shared that with Mrs. Kennelly earlier, and relative to what you're talking about, my comfort level would be, quite frankly, to keep it as information piece, and the other pieces are things that are out there. Board members can or cannot do it. But, yeah, would we like some board members to do these things? But I don't think that we want to put it in something like, as a guide, because then I think it becomes the expectation that it is a mandate.
And that might be another example of does the document lead to generation of discussion? And if through discussion we say, yeah, there's 9 people that say, yeah, that makes sense. Then do we use that discussion to put it into the handbook as I think I made this comment earlier that I'm the oldest one here, and when you say Mr. Dwyer, I still think of my father. So I have trouble not saying Jennifer, so pardon me if I slip from time to time. And so
We'll
should
take it
we
as a
have
compliment.
discussion
It's
on
okay.
this? Should we have discussion on this within the policy committee and then bring something forward, or do we limit it simply to, I'm going to put down wording from either the bylaws or the policy or Connecticut state law, that's the end of it? And I think that's it's not so much the debate on the individual questions, it's
Right.
whether we have that discussion or not.
Exactly.
So
It's
if you
it's a
could feed
broad,
that back-
it's a broad-based question, it's not specific. And for the record, you're totally allowed to CC Dr. Title, there's no rules that say you aren't. And that all did come out of a board retreat. All right, so we will send all of our comments to you, and if you guys can all work on that in policy, that would be great. Thank you very much for all of your work on that. Mr. Carey?
So PTA Council met last week on the 7th, and the Brian Fagan grants were presented to 6 of our teachers, who I'll recognize real briefly: Stephen D'Angelo, Seth Fry, Erica Griffin, Bezia Noderwitz, Karen Shaughnessy, and Lisa Velke. All received grants from our PTA Council to help with their continued education and professional development. So thank you very much to our PTAs for their support of our teachers and their growth and improving instruction in the district. It's a very important part of what we're trying to accomplish. Additionally, there was a discussion of the budget with the chairs of the different bodies in the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, Board of Ed, so that was a good educational discussion. Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen joint meeting voted on the capital projects in their meeting 2 meetings ago. All of the projects that we have put forth, with the exception of the Osborne Hill windows, were approved by those 2 bodies. The sense of the bodies on the windows was that they weren't rejecting them outright, but they wanted to bundle the windows together with the Ludlow project to achieve an economy of scale. And there were also some housekeeping issues in terms of wanting to have a building committee for getting state compensation, things of that nature. So we're going to run a separate track, is the understanding I have at this point, for the Osborne Hill windows. The rest of the projects are now going to be moved forward to the RTM on the 26th of the month.
Great, excellent, thank you. Mr. Liu's not here this evening. Dr. Title?
Now, if you remember from the last meeting, I gave virtually no report, so I could hold time over to this meeting. However, we're an hour behind schedule, all for very good reason. So I will talk quickly, and the length of the report will depend on how many questions you ask me. I also should point out that the committee meetings, the RTM committee meetings, which are important about those capital projects that Mr. Carey referenced, are next Monday and Wednesday. So your attendance is more than welcome as a show of support. And if you know people who are interested in those projects, they're welcome. I have on the agenda, and it really is just, and obviously you've all combed through it because we've already discussed some of it, is the strategic school profile tome. And we produced, and I think this may be the, I don't know if this is the last year of it, but all these strategic school profiles, all available on the web. So us putting them in a nice binder for everybody is a bit of an antiquated process. We are required by law to put on the agenda as an item strategic school profiles at the first board meeting after they're released. Doesn't mean we have to have a big to-do, and that's why it's sitting there. So if the state audits us, we send this agenda in and says, here, we complied. So you have all the data. Now, these things are supposed to come out in November. Last year, they came out in May. So I don't know if we're behind or ahead of schedule this year, but this is better than before. So a lot of the data is old, and I don't think there's anything in there that is particularly outstanding, because you've seen all the student performance data before in the CMT results that Dr. Rosado prepares and sends out to you in August. I think that it's it's a good sort of informational thing. It's good for, say, realtors to hand this to people about the school district. But in terms of sort of new information, I'm not sure there's a lot in there. So I guess I would say, these things just come out, we print them up. You probably haven't had a lot of time with them. If you do have specific questions about them, or if there's some data that you don't understand how they calculated, just lob that into me on an email, and I can send the out to everybody, and we can post on the website. But I don't know if you want to discuss it, or if you have particular questions, I can do it now. But given the hour, maybe you don't want to do that. It's up to you.
guess if we can try and go quickly, and if it gets some depth, we can send stuff in, Mrs. Brand.
Yeah, there were just a couple of things in particular. One, the difference in graduation rates at the two high schools concerned me. Also, the reporting of violations of school policy relative to the size of the schools. It seemed a disproportionate difference that I also, what I'm looking for is consistency from school to school. And I had a concern relative to that. And the last thing is that, to me, the strategic school profile, I'd like to see as the foundation for the district improvement plan. There was, I think, a grade 3 at Riverfield that, to me, I saw a testing that I, quite frankly, found very disturbing. And what we're doing to address those kinds of things, I think, would be very valuable. So I know I've asked you before, but to me, this is like, where you are, and then your district improvement plan is where you want to go.
And as I said, the student performance data is one of the, obviously, backbones of the development of the school improvement plans, and those are posted on the individual schools' websites for public viewing. So that's all out there for everybody to see. And that's what I'm saying is that, this data has been used in the school improvement plans by the individual schools. So this is not new. This is data that's been out there. And so each school has worked, and it's not just CMT data that's used in the development of school improvement plans, but that is certainly a component of it. And the other pieces we'll do a little research on in terms of why there might be variation in the ones you mentioned.
Since they are posted, will we as a board, be getting a presentation on?
Well, I was going to, they're huge. For us to print them up and give them all to you would be voluminous.
No.
So I don't know if you want, we have 17 school improvement plans.
No, I meant as an overall, as a district, the highlights of where we were going.
Yeah, we could do that. Sort of the patterns, the big themes across the different schools. That's doable. I was concerned, we were at one point thinking, well, let's give the board members a copy of every one of them. They should know that they're pretty intense, because what you've got is, you've got a school improvement plan, strategies that are being implemented school-wide, and then, say at the middle school, you've got them for each content area and each grade level, so that it stacks up pretty quickly. We don't want to kill too many trees, but...
An executive summary
right.
would be great.
So I think we could do an overview of the sort of themes that are present and what the different schools are focusing on. And they are, by the way, 2-year school improvement plans, or 18 months. In other words, so they go through 2013. There'll be a chance to tweak them in the fall, but the development of them was a new process this year, much more in depth, and so it took a little longer than it will down the road.
Mr. Convertito?
Yeah, just along those lines, I don't want to get a, 45-minute report on that, and I think if it's just a written synopsis of...
Yeah.
I'm more concerned that if there were areas that were identified that need specific attention, that we know what those are, so that we're aware of it, nothing comes up and sort of blindsides us. I mean, a school improvement plan, I've seen one. It's, it's a very nice document, it's a very thick document, but a lot of it has to do with day-to-day operations, things like that. And I don't want to get into that. I want to know that if we have an issue with third-grade math at a school,
Right.
it's been targeted and we know what we're doing with it.
Right, and that's fine. I think that's something that, at the district level, we're looking across the schools at, what the commonalities might be. I know Ms. Kataya Leonard spends a lot of her time looking at that across 11 schools. So, all fair points. That was A. I do have a few other things. I just want to make mention, because it was in the packet, and you got a big packet on Friday. For those of you that were at the Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen meeting, they made several requests, data requests for us, and you got copies of those on Friday. But one of them, which I'm sure is near and dear to your heart, was my audit response, or Part 2. I knew it was something that I had to do, but I was kind of putting it off until somebody asked for it. Somebody finally asked for it. Almost a year to the day that my response to the initial audit was given, as it turned out. And so I just want to, and we have posted this on the district's website as well. There's a section on the website on the audit. So if people that really want to have a field day, you can look at the actual audit. You look at the initial response, which is much more detailed, that I did last year in March, and then an update. And the big picture on that is that, you know, there's a substantial body of recommendations in that audit that are implemented, either in the current year or they're planned to be implemented next year. There's a small subset of recommendations that are going to be implemented. We haven't done them yet, and then there's another set that we just don't feel is worth it. So that's what's in there. It's on the website. Just want to point that out. Now, one of your tasks you gave to me was to keep you updated on what's happening with state legislation activity. And just so happens that last Friday, the Lower Fairfield County Superintendents had a meeting with the Commissioner of Education. And, you know, this is front and center right now. I mean, in this state, there's no hotter issue at the legislature, with the exception of maybe liquor sales on Sundays and red light cameras at intersections, which is very dangerous for me. The last one is, not the liquor stores. The red lights at I'm opposed to cameras at intersections. I just want to make that clear. There are too many lights in this town with short yellow lights. Anyway, we're going to break this up a little bit. You guys are way too serious. Okay, there's a huge amount of legislation in. The commissioner gave out this, I had never seen this before. He handed this out, this summary document, which we went to print for you in color, really gives a good overview of what's in the proposal, the governor and the commissioner's proposal. The areas that are generating the most concern, which have to do with teacher evaluation and tenure and certification, are part of a much larger bill, Senate Bill 24, which is moving through the Education Committee right now. The way it works is the Education Committee, which is a joint committee, House and Senate, is scheduled to report out the bills it considers favorable that it's recommending on Thursday. That'll be our first clue as to how much of Senate Bill 24 survives and how much of it has been modified or killed. The governor is on a tour of the state stumping for this bill. It is a huge issue. It would have major ramifications for every school district in the state from a lot of different perspectives. And so it's certainly worth watching, but right now, it's hand-to-hand combat in the trenches politically. There's no handicapping this race. And we'll get our first clue on Thursday when it comes out of the committee. But even there, it can be amended. It's going to be a race to the finish. The first Wednesday in May is the drop-dead date for this legislature, and they just adjourn, and that's it. So it may just get killed entirely. It could get passed as it is. It could be modified significantly or whatever, but this is something that bears watching. And so I will continue, rather than take up lots of time at meetings, as stuff comes out to me, I'm just going to start forwarding it. Updates, trying not to, in stuff I give to you, not send you partisan kinds of things, because there's all kinds of interest groups out there spinning this, and so as I get as much factual information about what's happening, I'll keep you abreast of it. But there's, to put it mildly, I don't think we've ever seen, since the mid-'80s, 84, 85, 86, I remember this kind of flurry around education reform. The Educational Enhancement Act really made major changes to education. We really haven't had this kind of activity at the state level since that time. So I'll just keep you posted, and if you've got specific questions about specific parts of the legislation, or you've heard this or whatever and you want feedback or more detail, let me know. I get this stuff sent to me all the time. I'll be happy to keep you posted on it. It's exciting and nervous time, I think, for everybody at the state. I think we've made some good movement with respect to a couple of our projects. Building on what Mr. Carey said, I've been meeting with the First Selectman about how to best move forward with our two big window projects, the Ludlow windows and the Osborne Hill windows. As you heard, there was some interest in bundling these. The hang-up on the Ludlow windows, and Mrs. Brand referred to some testing that was completed there, but as many of you know, the testing company said, you know, additional testing is needed. And until we do additional testing on the Ludlow windows, we can't really come forward with a funding request, TFC, and nobody could because you don't know what the abatement costs are. And so TFC's been kicking around, you know, they have no funding, so they'd have to go through a whole procedure to get funding. And basically, while all this is going on, because the state and the feds know that we have to do more testing, they're breathing down our necks saying, where's your action plan to remediate, what's going on? And after a while, you can't say to them, well, sorry, it's over here. You know, they don't care about our system. So the first selectman and I agreed, and he's formed the TFC, that the round 2 of testing for Ludlow windows will be handled by the school system. We will take that over, work with Sands Cleary, and at the same time contract with this testing company to do beginning testing on Osborne Hill, because it's the same blocker. Essentially what we heard about Osborne Hill was, well, look, until you know what the abatement costs are, how do you know your numbers are in the ballpark, right? And so you have to lay some cash out to get the numbers, really what it boils down to. Both of these are state reimbursable projects. So there's an interest on all parties to have a full funding of these projects, if it's possible, by June 30th, because that's the cutoff to get into the next round of the legislative funding for these projects. And because we believe that we can handle the testing costs, we're going to get a not-to-exceed figure from the testing company. We believe that number will be within our budget, and we'll be able to move forward with this. Mr. Cohen is diligently working on this, and in conjunction with Sands Cleary, in conjunction with the state and the federal agencies that are overseeing this, so that before anything is signed, before we move ahead, we have sign-offs from all those bodies. Then we'll be able to get an abatement cost and move it forward. So I think this is going to dislodge it from one of the blocks. If we can possibly do it out of our own budget, then we don't have to go through the funding cycle with the town bodies, which would take 2 more months. And then we would, you know, just be that much farther behind. So we think we can do this. I think it's a breakthrough. We'll still have to get together with the architect the TFC hired and maybe with the TFC themselves to put together the full funding package. That's phase 2. But I think phase 1, you know, this is a big step forward for us. So I just want to let you know, people know that we're forwarding ahead with that.
It would be good if the first selectman got the building committee together while we're doing all of this, so we're ready to go.
Right. Well, I think
Casey's listening.
Yeah. Well, that's a story. I think what has to happen for this to be qualify for state reimbursement by June 30th, he doesn't have to have the building committee named by June 30th. He needs to have the resolutions, the same resolutions that the RTM passed for Fairfield Ward roof. Those 3 resolutions establishing a building committee. That will do in terms of getting the state. But obviously, right after that happens, you want to be able to hit the ground running with this, and that's why you need the actual names.
Yeah.
So I think this can go on parallel tracks, but I think I see a sliver of light at the end of the tunnel here for both these projects.
Mr. Convertito?
Yeah.
What would, if the funding's coming out of our budget, what would be left undone that was being planned on being done?
Well, we're going to have to look at what the number is. We haven't gotten the firm number from the testing company yet. We do have some consulting account lines that we do hold, and we need to look at those and see what balances might be left in those lines, and if there's any additional money, other lines within our budget that we can absorb. But certainly, we're not going to not do, say, a scheduled maintenance project that was in our budget so that we can do this testing. You know, I guess until I get the not-to-exceed number from the testing company, it's really hard to give you a definitive answer. So that's we'll be diligent about it, and we'll let you know. Keep you informed along the way in terms of what the number is and so forth. But we're proceeding apace at this.
So can you pull it out of the snow removal line?
Well, that's
Not to jinx us.
Right. Don't jinx us.
Don't say that. I should have recognized you.
Look, I want to.
Did I call on her? Who invited her to this party?
Son,
Yes.
son.
We'll look. we'll be pounding on the door of Mrs. Munsell begging for funds. It's what we got used to doing with Bonnie, and now we'll do it with Doreen. So I'm sure that, you know, I just have to say that if the testing company comes back with a number that's just way too high and we just can't do this, then we've got to come up with a different strategy, right? But if the number comes back in the ballpark, then I think we'll try to, you know, just for the sake of moving the ball forward, and the fact that, you know, even though the TFC started this project, they don't have funding, and we need to remediate. So we're trying to move it along is basically the idea, and if it means we need to contribute a little to it, I think it shows good faith and advances the ball down the field.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So
Mrs.
is
Brand.
there a timeline that we have to follow for the State Department of Health as well when we identify and when we have to do anything, like remediation?
We had a deadline. Mr. Cullen had to file a report with the U.S. Department of Environmental Protection, was March 2nd or March 3rd? March 2nd. It was close. It was one of those 2 dates. And with an action plan for remediation, we did file that. So we're okay with that. We're waiting for feedback from them. If they okay, and one of the things we sent to them was the testing proposal that had come from AMC, which was, this is what our industrial person says we need to do the full to do the full thing. Do you agree with this? So when they come back to us, then they'll tell us, and then we can move along. So we've met the required timelines so far, but you know, to come back and say, well, you know, it's going to be a couple months, we don't know if we're going to get the funding, and then it'll be another couple months, they're not going to want to hear that, right? And neither does anybody else. I mean, it's, you know, so I think it's worth pursuing this, and I'm, you know, I'm optimistic that we can at least get this roadblock taken care of and give everybody peace of mind, and then move both these projects forward, because I think there could be an economy of scale here. I think the Board of Finance was onto something with that. So, okay, I'm almost done. This is the world's longest superintendent's report. Thursday night at 7 o'clock at Fairfield Ludlow High School is the town-wide orchestra celebration concert, and I'm the MC.
Ooh, that's
Okay.
a hot ticket item.
So it's a hot ticket. I don't know. Contact Donna Schmardell with an emergency request for tickets. Although she's going to make me pronounce, I think it's either an Italian or a French song, and I have terrible pronunciation of that stuff, so I'll probably embarrass myself, which might make it even more interesting for people to come watch. Okay, that's it for me.
Sure. Mr. Dwyer.
In my other YMCA role, I was the public policy chair for the state of Connecticut and would frequently go up to Hartford. So I have a lot of state reps and senators from 25 towns that I'm friends with. So when Cabe said, does anybody want to go to the Day on the Hill tomorrow, I raised my hand. I'm sure that some of them will ask if there's, if the Fairfield Board of Education has any viewpoint on Senate Bill 24. And because we've not talked about it, I'll defer on that unless suddenly Dr. Title or this board says, yeah, you ought to at least say this. And if that's true, somebody should tell me. Otherwise, I'll just be a polite face up there.
Thank you. Old business, approval of the elementary art curriculum. Recommended motion is that the Board of Education approve the elementary art curriculum. Moved by Mrs. Brand, seconded by Mrs. Kennelly. Is there any board discussion? Seeing none, is there any comment from the public? Excellent. All in favor of the motion? It's unanimous. The art curriculum passes. Item B, approval of policy number 5119, student discipline. Recommended motion that the Board of Education approve policy number 5119, student discipline. Moved by? No one? Oh, okay. Mrs. Gerber, seconded by Mrs. Kennelly. Board discussion. Mr. Fatterbean.
I have some comments with respect to this proposed resolution or policy. And I also had some of the proposed amendments I might like to make, or I'm proposing to make. Some of them may be considered extensive only in nature of cleanup, in the sense of wording, language, and changes to make it a little more consistent, and at least that's what I think would be more consistent and a little tighter policy. And I passed that out at our last committee meeting of the policy, but since this was already moved forward to the board, we took no action or discussion on it. There's a couple substantive proposals that I would propose amending, but rather than getting in each of these different amendments word for word, which may take some time, and since I don't believe there's a lot of pressure to move this along in any particular timely fashion, that I would propose, unfortunately, I'm reluctant to do so, but rather than take the time now to go through some of these changes, the majority of which I think are just tightening language and so forth, to refer it back to committee so that at least the presentation on the board can have in front of them the language changes as far as they divide it out as far as what makes better wording language and more consistent wording language, and then proposals which have the modifications and substantive language that may change things that require a more substantive vote. So I think for expediting the discussion, that it may be better to push it back to committee to present it in a cleaner format than to go through the various amendments tonight.
Okay, is there
So
a
I would move
to do that?
to
Is
do
there a
that.
second on that? Mrs. Brand? I'll just take a moment to comment on that and say that I think that's probably a good idea. And I think the best way to be working our policy committee is to try and get all of this work done in committee, to try and reach consensus by the 3 people that are on the policy committee, and then bring that back when at all possible with the 3 of you on the same page. It's not going to happen all the time, but I think that will help our board work. Any further discussion?
One further comment. We were also handed out tonight another proposed change, which is what I saw for the first time tonight, made by some other individual. And it relates, I'd like to take a look at that as well a little more deeply, see what the basis is that and what the intent of that is. So that could have been done at the committee level as well, to come back with comments and thoughts on that.
I think we can use your motion loosely enough to incorporate all the changes that appeared before us this evening to go back to policy. Mrs. Brand?
Actually, I agree. In fact, when it came up, and I heard Mr. Fattabine say that, this was something that I distributed, and I think that would be fine and appropriate.
All right, excellent. Mr. Carey?
Through the chair to Dr. Title, does this change of timeline put the administration behind the 8 ball in any way, shape, or form?
No, it's fine.
Okay, great. Anybody from the public wish to comment on this particular motion? Okay, is the board prepared to vote? The motion is to remand this back to the policy committee. All in favor? Anyone, Mrs. Canali, Mrs. Gerber, Mrs. Iacono, Mr. Dwyer, Mr. Fatterby, Mr. Carey, Mrs. Brand in favor. Anyone opposed? Abstentions? Mr. Convertito abstains. Thank you. Okay. New business. Discussion of the naming of the Fairfield Woods Middle School Fitness Center. Dr. Title, I will refer this to you and remind board members that this is enclosure number 3 in your packet.
Mr. Hatzis has been waiting patiently to address the board on this issue, and this is an item for discussion only. It's not scheduled for a vote.
Good evening, everyone. I just want to turn the mic on.
It's a
I just
good
want to thank
start.
you for the opportunity to come in front of you tonight to propose the dedication and naming of our fitness center at Fairfield Woods Middle School in honor of Mr. Ray Agostino. With me tonight is Miss Cindy Metz, who is a PE teacher at Fairfield Woods. We have some other staff members from Fairfield Woods here tonight, along with our PTSA chairperson, Miss Sydney Brooks Raha. And As you saw in my letters to Dr. Title, Mr. Agostino was what we would call a lifer in Fairfield. He graduated from Roger Ludlow High School in 1956. He was hired by the Fairfield Public Schools in 1962 at North Stratfield as an elementary school teacher, and through some other positions ended up at Fairfield Woods as an assistant principal in 1990. He retired in 2007, spanning a 45-year career in Fairfield. In 2007, the year of his retirement, he was also awarded the Town Employee of the Year Award by Fairfield for his dedication and commitment to the kids and to the families of Fairfield. He's truly a pillar in our community, and when he passed away in 2010, left a huge hole in the hearts of many, and especially in the Fairfield Woods community. Ray was a master educator. He was a trusted advisor and mentor to so many teachers, teacher leaders, fellow administrators, myself included. He had an incredible way to have that balance between healthful fear and love from the students. You know, nobody wanted to go to Mr. Agostino's office, for sure, but when he walked through the cafeteria, you know, the kids would cheer. He was a great man. And he also hired some great teachers. And so if, with your indulgence, I'd like to invite Ms. Metz to just share a little personally about her, Mr. Agostino's influence on her and the community at Woods.
Hi, my name is Cynthia Metz. I'm a physical education teacher at Fairfield Woods Middle School. Please vote in favor of our fitness room being dedicated to Ray Agostino. I agree with what Greg has said to you and why the fitness room should be dedicated to Ray. Standing here before you is very difficult for me because of how much Ray meant in my life. Ray touched lives of so many people, teachers, parents, and students. Ray hired me 16 years ago as a physical education teacher. During my interview, Ray was very interested in my fitness background. He became very instrumental in getting our fitness program off the ground at Fairfield Woods. Ray wanted our physical education program to consist of activities that our students could use for life. He wanted our youth to be active, not just at school, but within the town programs, at the parks, and the beaches. He wanted our students to enjoy and value an active lifestyle. He wanted the physical education teachers to instruct in a way that motivated students to enjoy the activities we taught them so that they continued to engage in later in life as well. I spent many days after school working out with Ray at the Fitness Edge. He pushed me to my limits at the gym, and he challenged me as an educator. We saw many Woods graduates at the gym. They always took time to speak with Ray. He was a role model to them. In and out of school, the students were always impressed with how fit he was. He looked great for his age. The reality is he looked good for any age. Ray had a great sense of humor, and I'm guessing he is laughing at me right about now, knowing how difficult this is for me to speak in front of you. However, I know he would be proud of me. I know he would be honored by this dedication. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. And I just want to add that so much of what we do, not just at Fairfield Woods, but in all three of our middle schools, has so much to do with Ray's influence. I mean, he helped bring about the change from the junior high model to the middle school model. He crafted our schedule that we still use today. He just was an amazing influence in so many ways. So I'll finish there. I'd be happy to entertain any questions or thoughts from the board.
Anybody have any commentary? Mrs. Brand?
Because I've been around a little bit longer, I did have the experience of sitting with Ray at a meeting quite some time ago, but great sense of humor and so much heart. So I think this is so deserved.
Thank you.
Anybody else? I just sort of have a procedural question. First, I have absolutely no issue whatsoever adopting this. I think it's an excellent idea. Clearly, Mr. Agostino is an excellent candidate. How can you argue with anything that he's done for the community? My question, though, is to Dr. Title. And do we have a policy about naming facilities, and how does that work? This is a no-brainer to me.
Right.
But how do we evaluate for things going on in the future, I guess?
Right, yeah, that's a good question, and I would agree, based on everything, is kind of a no-brainer, but actually I had to go back into tap Bev's memory of when was the last time we did this and what was the procedure so we could find out. There is no board policy on this. The practice has been that anybody, who wanted to would bring a request to the board and the board would vote, on it, which is the procedure we're following here. But I think you raise a good point, and I would like to see us develop a policy on it. We have, a lot of great people who have worked in the school system. And you know me, I just love the policy committee. So I think we can get some good guidance from CABE on this front. And, we may get other requests. And, we've got a lot of people retiring or have retired recently. And, the board could start to see a number of requests. And it would be good, I think, for us to have some guidelines. Although I can't think of any guidelines we could come up with that this wouldn't fit, by the way. So I don't think this has anything to do with the substance of it.
No,
But
definitely not.
I think it can go on parallel tracks, but I think this is a good topic for policy committee to at least have some parameters. And because then if somebody calls in and says, I'm thinking about naming, what's the procedure, what are the rules, what are the standards, we can give them something. Right now, there are no standards. Although, any standards we think about,
This is a
this
good
is it.
start for standards.
This is a good start, right? Here's a standard, right?
Mr. Convertito.
I mean, I have no problem with this request, and I do think there needs to be a policy on it, and as much as I love Nancy Larson, Nancy Larson Way, Nancy Larson Auditorium, and I don't want to get into this multiple, if we're going to name something after a person or in memory of a person, I think it should stand on its own, be significant, and I think the policy committee can do that, so we're not flooding our schools with names that, or multiple names multiple times. I think it should be respectful and to the point and why it was done. Again, I have no issue with this presentation and with this one, but I think we need to just have some guidelines by which the board follows.
Mr. Dwyer.
Knowing that policies have a way of taking time to develop, is there a rush to do this? And if suddenly it's not done till the end of the school year, that's okay? Or would the board consider that we don't have a policy, but you can't imagine that this wouldn't fit the policy, so we could take action on this as we're developing the policy, is a question that I would ask.
I'll just speak for myself, but I'll look around for nods of the heads. I don't foresee any issue with this being held up while we formulate a policy for things going forward. Does the board generally agree with that? So I don't anticipate any problems at our next meeting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both for patiently waiting for your moment in the sun.
And policy got more homework.
And policy got more homework.
Okay, next item is discussion of the educational specifications for Osborne Hill Elementary School window replacement project.
Okay, this is another step in that project. If you remember, this is a state reimbursable project. In order to get qualified for state reimbursement, the board has to approve ed specs. Here they are. This is a discussion item, not for a vote. Mr. Cullen and Mr. Morabito are here to answer any questions you might have about it. Tom, maybe you could just discuss how you develop these.
Yep. Anytime we go to the state for reimbursement on a educational facility project, requires an educational specification. And we've done window projects like this in the past. We've done educational specs for windows. And as some of you know, the meeting we had with the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, it was mentioned, did we have ed specs yet? And start moving this along. So we developed them. Sal Morabito's here tonight. He handles a lot of the state filing paperwork. He worked on the educational specs for Stratfield, Fairfield Woods Middle School, the Riverfield ones we just finished. So he's here to answer any questions that you may have. The window ones are pretty simple. They're usually just a one-pager, whereas a larger project would be 15, 20 pages.
Anybody have any questions or concerns? Mr. Convertito.
I have one, and it goes back to the abatement issue. If we're going through, and again, I'm not looking to change the standard at this point in time, but if we're going through an abatement issue, and we got, what was it, 18 doors we're not replacing, which I assume are going to have the same abatement issue as the other 53 that we are replacing, I can't remember the numbers that were in there. Should we just do them now and not have to revisit this issue if we know we have contamination there? If I remember looking at the capital project,
Right.
there were a number of doors that were within the window casings or attached to the window casings, and some that were in cement. My assumption is they were all installed using the same caulk that has the same PCB in it. Should we not, at this point, bite our tongue and just say, listen, we think we should do the whole thing, and rather than revisit this thing, or are those other doors going to last 30 more years?
I mean, it's a good discussion and a good question for this board, but I don't want the hazardous material to drive the project. And that's not what the state's telling us either, and the U.S. EPA that I'm working with. They know that there's going to be instances where we could have some contamination that might be on structural members or other portions of the building that they know we won't be required to pull it out. We may have to encapsulate it. So I wouldn't remove the doors that aren't part of the project just because they might come up positive with PCBs or asbestos or lead paint. But as far as, I'm a big advocate of looking at an old elementary school. If we're going to replace all the windows, let's replace all the windows. If we're going to replace all the doors, let's do all the doors, and we start fresh with a whole new set of documents and equipment for that school. But I think the intent of the ed spec and what Sal was working on was there's certain doors that are part of the window wall, and they're all integral.
Anybody else? Mr. Dwyer?
My memory may be faulty. I thought part of the answer the last time we talked about this is that there were certain window units that were newer, and therefore those were among the window units that were not going to be replaced. And am I wrong on that, or?
You're correct.
So, to follow up on Mr. Convertito's question, where there are PCBs related to structural members that the federal government wouldn't expect us to replace, if we also said there are certain windows that are newer, and yes, they have PCBs, but we've decided not to replace them, would they accept that as a rationale as well, or should we limit the things that we don't replace to just
I can't
the door
answer if they would
issue?
accept it or not, but it would be part of the action plan. What the state's looking for is once you find any hazardous material, whether it be asbestos or PCB or lead paint, what's your action plan with that school building for the foreseeable future? So we'd be responding with an action plan from our consultants that, in fact, this amount of certain windows will be replaced, so the PCB or hazardous material will be replaced. The existing building that has any will be documented, and we'll have to have a monitoring piece to go back and keep checking on that on a regular basis until, in fact, it is all pulled out.
Or to the earlier point that I think you agreed with, even though they're newer, pull them out now and deal with the entire issue now. If that's the choice, which choice would you make? Document them over time and pull them out later, or pull them out now?
Well, the specific windows that
You see, I thought
slated
there were like 18
to
of
stay
them.
are past the time where PCBs would be expected. They're from the 96
Okay.
addition renovation.
So in all likelihood, the testing
So
will
they're-
say that there's no
Correct.
PCBs
Correct.
in those, if I remember, 18 windows.
Correct.
If you found them, then you'd pull them into the project and replace them.
More than likely.
Correct.
Thank you.
Mrs. Brand?
Please correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Cullen, but it isn't just the presence of a lot of those substances, it's their condition and what risk they pose to the community. So what you were talking about earlier is having PCBs, asbestos, actually drive a project. That's also dependent on the condition. If the asbestos is crumbling and posing a health risk, then that changes our timetable and our requirements. If the PCBs are airborne and we have high numbers, that changes our timetable. But when they're not, then it's based on the need of the project.
I'd say partially, yes. We've talked with the state about when we do find it that there is no panic. There are options to encapsulate, as simple as recaulking over PCB-laden caulk. painting over caulk and then monitoring it. But certainly, if it's crumbling and falling all over the floor, which we don't have, our custodians do a good job keeping the buildings clean and intact, but you're right, we would have to air test and see if it's airborne.
Thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Fattabine. You
refer-
got to get me when I look my head down the aisle.
I got it quicker. Just referring to the project now on this document on page 2. Basically, all the windows to the main building installed between 1958 and 1969 are going to be replaced. It says meeting current standards of maximum energy efficiency, and I guess as well as they're going to be tinted. I assume that's probably sufficiently specific to get the efficiencies you want with the windows. But one question I had is, since these are classrooms, would it be desirable to have any type of specification or functional aspect with respect to soundproofing of the windows? In other words, that these windows are going to have some soundproofing nature so that they're adequate for instruction within the classroom.
I think my answer to that would be that a new window would be more soundproof than an old one. The old windows are single pane, aluminum frame. The new windows are double pane. They're insulated. They have an insulation value, and then they're tinted for the sun rays. But generally, it's not a huge item we look at for soundproofing of the classrooms.
All right.
Mr. Dwyer?
By tinting, are you assuming that that means low E glass?
Yes.
Correct.
And would you be better off actually using that as the statement of the specification, because it's a more common reference when you're specifying windows than tinting?
The tinting and the low E are two separate. The coating doesn't give you the low E. It's the gas that's used, the argon gas that's used between the panes of glass. In and of itself, there are some coatings that add to the low E.
Then
So there are two parts to that.
Having more than a few window contractors say, you didn't say low E, so I'm not giving it to you, should we include in our specifications?
We
that
do, actually.
expect
It's a
low
good
E?
question. I'm glad you brought it up, because when we first started looking at windows, we hired a consultant, a building envelope consultant, to come out and specify future windows that we want to use in the district. You know, we wanted to have a standard that we would follow that would meet the high insulation values, the low E, meet the needs of the district as far as how they open, the ease of opening and getting air into the classrooms. We didn't want a contractor to drive the type of window he wanted to put in. We wanted to give him a
I don't want to interrupt, but
specification.
we're short on time, so I just want to clarify. The level of detail on the spec, there's another level out there that goes much beyond this.
Yes, there
that
is.
the low E would be included in. Thank you.
Yes.
Correct.
Anybody else? This will be a voting item at our next meeting.
These guys can just stay.
The next is the discussion of the UI Energy Opportunities Program for projects at Mill Hill and Holland Hill Elementary Schools.
And this is discussion only.
Mr. Convertito?
To be done when? In what budget year?
The work would be done as soon as we sign for the energy opportunities. We would talk with the contractor about scheduling, and I'm assuming that it'll be done prior to the end of this school year.
So we're talking 2011, 2012 budget year,
Correct.
right? $80,000. Correct?
Correct.
$80,212.
Correct.
How does this dovetail, and I guess through the chair to Dr. Title, how does this dovetail with our need to now pay for the testing at the high school for abatement issues? And can we do both at the same time?
Right. Maybe you should explain the financing of this project.
Sure.
Okay.
This project takes in direct rebates from the UI to offset the cost. So what you're looking at is $80,000 is the net cost for these two projects, which are lighting upgrades at Mill Hill and Holland Hill. That $80,000 is financed, 0% financing over 4 years. That financing term is longer than the expected payback that will be produced by the energy savings. So immediately upon activation, once this is installed, we're paying for that $80,000 with on-bill financing, but our bills will be lower by an amount greater than that payment. At the expiration of the 4-year term, we'll see the full energy savings on our
So
energy bill.
they add a cost to your bill on a monthly basis, right?
They add a cost to the bill, but it's offset by the energy savings that are produced by the upgrade.
And is that number included in next year's budget? Because we touted how we had all this energy savings going forth in the 2012-13 budget.
This is not included in that budget item, but the differential, the following year would be proved out, and I'm assuming that we would build it into the following year budget.
So it's over 4 years, so it's $20,000 a year.
Correct. But you're producing, if you look farther down, you're producing almost $25,000 worth of savings.
And if it wasn't financed at 0%, because somebody's obviously paying 0% for something, okay, there's no such thing as free money, what's the alternative? They can tell you it's 0% financing. There's a finance charge built in that $80,000. If you said, no, we want to pay the costs up front, what would that $80,000 go down to? Or do we not know that?
I don't know that. That's not the program.
Can I comment?
Mr. Dwyer?
I've used this program before, and essentially UI is encouraging you to engage in energy savings, and the rates that they charge don't go up for the school district because we, quote, borrowed money from them. So you might say that there's no such thing as 0% financing, but the state provides support to UI to encourage their customers to do this. So this actually is an example of, quote, free money. And instead of realizing the entire amount of savings in the first, second, or third year, you only realize a portion of it because the other portion you're using to pay back the, quote, no-interest loan, and then you get the full savings as being reported probably in year 4 and thereafter. So it's a very good program that has been very helpful to a lot of institutions to, go through their buildings and make them more energy efficient. And I understand your answer is that next year's electricity budget is based on the savings incurred from the lower rates the town negotiated, not because of any expectation of lower energy consumption, and that you'll take into account in the following year's budget.
Correct.
Thank you.
But if this is a state subsidized program, how come we don't have any information on the state subsidy for the no-interest loan? If my assumption, again, through the chair to Mr. Dwyer, is that the state is incentivizing UI to do this, then the state is paying UI the finance charge on that money or subsidizing that somehow, and I don't see any details on that.
This won't be an answer to your question, but I never saw any details before. I didn't look a gift horse in the mouth. I said, this is going to save me money in the long term. It's not costing me anything, and I would sign the document. I wouldn't, quite frankly, go into that level of detail. So I don't know where that level of detail might be.
We can ask for it.
If we said, no, we don't want to finance it, is that $80,000 a lower number? That's my question. Even if it's a substantially lower number, okay, then maybe we want to consider doing it now and being done with it in this fiscal year. That's
We
my
can
only
find out.
reason. It's my only reason in raising the question.
But so if I understand it from a cash flow perspective, if you look at the Holland Hill, just as an example, which is on page 6, the net cost of $40,000 is paid over 4 years.
Correct.
So that our bills increase by approximately $10,000. This is perfect on the math night, okay? But this is estimating.
We should make Mr. Wakeman do it.
That's right. No, I should do it, because usually I'm just good at subtraction, so I'm working on my other skills. So we're going to pay $10,000 more per year approximately on our bills, but the savings in our energy is $12,000 a year. So in years 1 to 4, essentially, we save approximately $2,400.
It's actually less than 4 years.
Okay. And then, once that's finished with, then we just get that savings
Correct.
permanently. So the cash flow for the first few years is not quite as good as it will be once you've paid off the money.
And
this
and if
is-
I could also comment, if we wanted to pay for this out of operations, then we'd have to also ask the question, since we're doing this $40,000, is there something we wouldn't do? And if we tried to pay it out of capital, we probably would take several months
Right.
explaining this.
I understand that, but
Two people.
we would need, I would like that data before we vote on it, because if there is...
We'll
if
get
there-
it, we'll
if-
get it for
You know,
you.
if there is the possibility of paying for it out of this operating budget and incurring all of the savings in the subsequent year, and we have the money now, let's do it and incur the savings.
It's a fair point, thank you. We'll get that information. Mr. Carey, then Mr. Fattabine.
Yeah, and I agree, Mr. Convertito, and the same question, different way. Can we get an advantage for paying earlier? What's the discount?
Yeah.
If I'm going to pay net 5 instead of net 30, what are you going to do for me?
Yeah, there you
As
go.
opposed to spreading it out over 48 months. So that would be the first question. My second question is, why are we only doing this at 2 schools?
Thank you, that was my question.
Very good. We're working with other ESCO company, energy service companies, to develop plans, similar plans to take advantage of energy opportunities at 4 other schools right now, and possibly a couple of more inside this calendar year. The UI program works from January 1 to December 31st. That's when the pot of money that's available runs out for the rebates and the financing. It's renewed come the following January, and we hope to take advantage of that opportunity next year, too.
If I remember correctly, the town negotiates energy rates, but we pay our own bills?
Right.
So
Right, we pay our own bills.
have we been in consultation with the town's finance people about this, just to make sure it doesn't, in other words, they have a, if I understand correctly, and I could be wrong, they have a consultant that comes in and does the math and gives us a group buy for the whole town, and does this change any of those parameters or throw anything off, I guess would be a question that.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you know?
I don't, but I know the town works in the same program. They are in contact with UI and a consultant, and they're doing a lot of energy savings on their end.
You might have, this project, Energy Opportunities, you might have read about it in the newspaper. They just did it for decorative street lights downtown.
Right.
Right.
It's
Like that,
the
for this whole big
exact
thing.
same program that was brought
Right.
before the town.
The town is, encourages us to do this, quite frankly. And so we're trying to take advantage of that energy.
We'll certainly share it with them.
They had a whole big thing, though, about how long to keep their lights on and turn them off and all that.
Right.
Are we faced with any of that issue?
No, our programming is handled. We have programmers
Okay.
already for
Okay.
schedule.
Mr. Fattabine.
These estimated annual savings that are projected, are those savings guaranteed by UI?
Yes, that's the math for the fixtures and the runtime, yes.
So they're going to say, if you don't actually realize these savings, we're going to credit you anyway for these savings or differentiate?
If we change our, this is based on our schedule. That was one of the things that they asked us, what was our runtime
Right, that's what the
for our
town-
lights.
For estimates.
Right.
So it's direct math. If we change it and decide that we want to keep the lights on all night, obviously, we're not going to have the exact same savings. So it's,
In other words, there is no guarantee. that
it's
you
not, it's
achieve-
not guaranteed to that
It's estimated
number.
based on your projections that we're going to achieve these
Correct.
savings, but in actual practice, you may not achieve these savings, in which case you're going to have to pay UI's, or the capital costs in the bill. Yeah, I'm just curious. It's not guaranteed. That's the bottom line. Is that right?
It's, if you put, yes.
You achieve the savings. If you choose to use those savings by keeping the lights on all night or doing other energy-consuming things, well, then you've chosen to spend the savings in that fashion. But as what the suggestion is, and what our experience has been, that as long as you maintain the usage approximately the same that you always have, then you will realize the savings. But they can't guarantee that, because you might change the use of the building and suddenly use it 16, 20 hours a day instead of,
Okay. No, I think they could guarantee it. If you use the same amount of energy as last year, they're going to guarantee
With
that-
the history of that building and the electric bills we shared with them, the savings are guaranteed.
All right. The other question would be that, are these the actual savings in view of the town's renegotiation of a lower kilowatt cost, in which case these savings were calculated on a higher kilowatt cost and therefore may be inflated to some extent?
They're not inflated, they're based on the new rate.
The new rate, all right. And the third and hopefully final question is that, to what extent will this affect a school such as possibly Mill Hill that may have some renovations coming up in the future? To what extent are these fixtures and lights easily accommodated in any potential renovation in the next year or so or 3 at another school?
They could be accommodated in a renovation, they're not. This particular company's buying these lights. Somebody else could buy these lights if we had to match them or replace them. So it's something that we could follow through on in a renovation project.
Right. And the third, I guess, I thought that was my last question. You mentioned one thing. Was
3B.
that is our agreement actually with UI, or is our agreement with this OLED Lighting Solutions?
It's UI and LED Lighting Solutions actually is the beneficiary of the actual rebate check that lowers the projected costs.
Contracts.
If you go into the gross cost for the project is, say, Holland Hill, $64,000. UI incentives at $23,000. That incentive check is just like mailing in for a rebate on your refrigerator. That check that comes back will go to LED Lighting Solutions. That's part of the agreement was
Who was on the contract?
LED Lighting
We
Solutions.
contract with LED Lighting Solutions. We're not contracting with UI.
Right.
Correct.
Both signing it.
We're both
We
signing.
have the whole contract here.
The energy opportunities is for the financial portion, is for the financing portion.
I didn't see the contract. All right. That's fine.
I'm sure you devoured it.
Okay. Anybody else on light bulbs?
Just I just assumed that my question had been about Holland Hill because I knew that was one of the ones coming up, and same thing, so that in the case of either school, this wouldn't be something that we'd be putting attention to, and then it's going to be...
Ripped out or anything,
Right.
no, it wouldn't.
All right, excellent. Next item is public comments and petitions, the rules of which are stated on the agenda. Would anyone like to address the board at this time? Please come forward. Just a reminder that you have 2 minutes to speak.
If I'm speaking on behalf of a group, if I go over a little bit, is that okay?
Technically, no.
Technically, no. Okay. All right. Good evening. My name is Tricia Donovan. I'm a parent at Mill Hill School, and I also have a child at Tomlinson. And I would like to enter a letter that I wrote to you into the public record. Dear Board of Ed members, we strongly urge you not to approve the new math curriculum that will be presented to you next week. The curriculum does not satisfy the demands of our students. Despite parental rights stated in the Board of Ed guidelines, parents were not permitted to give input on the proposed curriculum in either content or development. Here are our concerns. The proposed curriculum is based on the Common Core standards meant to ready students for the demands of college and career. However, these standards are not internationally benchmarked. This means that although the Common Core Committee studied the top-tier nation standards, they've chosen to ask less of our students at each grade level, so that by the time our students reach 7th grade, they are 2 years behind. Professor R. James Milgram of Stanford University, the only mathematician on the Common Core Validation Committee, refused to sign off on these standards for their lack of rigor. Fairfield's main resources remain constructivist fuzzy math textbooks. The Scott Forsman text has been poorly rated and has been in use here since 2004, despite persistent opposition from parents. This needs to be properly addressed. Westport, on the other hand, acknowledged that fuzzy math delays the mastery of foundational skills and has chosen a resource that meets the standards and methodology of the top-tier nations. Last week, a focus group was organized to review the proposed curriculum for grades 3 through 5, and parents were given insufficient lead time to review these documents. Our expectations of dealing with resources, delivery, support, and rigor were not a part of this review process. The curriculum leaders provided us with just 1 hour to review all 3 grades together. Clearly, the parents were only convened to review grammatical and formatting errors. The curriculum itself was already a fait accompli. Since you will be voting on these documents next week, please know that the Board of Ed website states residents may have input in the development of the new curricula, and while we requested input, it was not granted.
Time. Thank you. You can, you can leave it if you want with to enter into the record. You can give us a copy. Ooh, we did all receive it in our board mail, but thank you.
Except for John, because his box was full.
Okay, thank you.
It's not, but it does keep saying that.
Hi, my name is Nadine Izet, and I have kids in the 3 schools, elementary, middle, and high school. First of all, I would like to say to Dr. Rosato that Connecticut is, according to the Fordham Foundation, the 3rd to last because of its lack of rigor in standards. We're lacking in basic facts, and we're lacking in standards algorithms. We want higher standards than those of the current core standards. We need clear, precise language for the standards. Mastery of facts, standard algorithms should be clearly defined at each grade level. Steve Wilson, professor of mathematics at Johns Hopkins, says that K-6 math education should still be devoted to the mastery of standard paper and pencil arithmetic. Without such mastery, a child has no hope for later mastery of non-fuzzy algebra. Mastery of traditional algebra is still the gateway to college mathematics. We need resources that reflect the same attitude toward foundational skills. Marilyn Burns is a hangover from 1989 NCTM standards. She doesn't believe in the value of paper and pencil arithmetic or mastery of standard algorithms. Scott Forsman has been described as weak in almost every aspect, according to the American Institute for Research. We would like a review process that includes input from parents. We do not want to write the curriculum or instruct delivery, but we can tell where the deficits currently are and what we need to support student learning. We would like to revisit the standards with educators and a mathematician, local university professor, to make sure the foundation skills are properly focused. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kelly Dunn, Budget Rep, Osborne Hill School. I just wanted to address the Board of Education, Dr. Title, and also members of Central Office, especially Tom Cullen, and thank you for all of your support for the Osborne Hill Windows Replacement Project going, as you have previously and going forward, and trying to keep it visible in the next few weeks and months. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ken Lee. I'm 71 Rhoda Avenue. I'm the Board of Ed rep from Sherman. And due to the lateness of the hour, I won't ask you to consider putting the second phase of the Sherman project on track. I'll come back next month and ask it. But just to remind you that it does take a little bit of time to get these things rolling, I thought I just might bring it up. And also to compliment you that your meetings are shorter than the RTM meetings.
We're a model of efficiency here.
Thank you. Anybody have anything for open board comment? Mrs. Brand?
It's something that came up as we were going through the budget process, and I just thought it was worthwhile mentioning that this was a different kind of year in that we did find, as we had already submitted our budget, that there were savings in the pension fund, and it did leave, I think, the Board of Ed at a disadvantage. Relative to that, moving forward, if Dr. Title, when we're getting ready for the, I know we've gone through the Board of Finance at this point, for the RTM, as to what $100,000 looks like in terms of programs, what $200,000 looks like, because I think all too often we're looking at dollars, but we're not actually looking at what the actual impact is. And we had a referendum, it failed, $800,000, but I think that was looking at specific things. I know Dr. Title, when asked what he would put back, it was world language. So again, what that means in terms of dollars, I think would be very valuable moving forward, so people understand when we're taking a hit, what those dollars actually mean in terms of programs.
Thank you. Anybody have anything else? Motion to adjourn. Mr. Carey, seconded by Mr. Dwyer. All in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you very much.